Chapter 1. The grand ballroom of the imperial capital was not merely a room. It was a living, breathing entity of light and sound. 1,000 candles flickered in the massive crystal chandeliers suspended from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm, golden glow that danced upon the polished marble floor. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, rosewater from the south, heavy musk from the east, and the crisp, powdery scent of aristocratic vanity. A string quartet played a waltz in the corner, the melody elegant and flowing, yet largely ignored by the throngs of nobles who were far more interested in the sport of gossip than music. Ladies in radiant gowns clustered together like blooming flowers in a garden, their fans fluttering like nervous butterflies as they whispered behind them. At the center of this social galaxy stood Serafina Lopez. As always, she was the sun around which the lesser planets orbited. She wore a dress of pale green silk that clung to her figure like a second skin, flaring out at the knees in a perfect mermaid line. The color accentuated her deep green eyes, which shone with the innocence of fresh spring leaves. Lady Lopez is truly beautiful today as well, a young nobleman sighed, gazing at her with undisguised adoration. Will you be sure to dance the next dance with me too? Another asked, stepping closer, eager to bask in her light. Serafina brought a gloved hand to her cheek, her eyelashes fluttering as she blushed a perfect, practiced shade of pink. "Oh my, you make me embarrassed when you say that," she murmured, her voice soft and melodious like wind chimes. "Embarrassed I only ever speak the truth," the man insisted. "Where else would you find someone as beautiful as Lady Lopez?" Serafina smiled shyly, but beneath the lashes her eyes were sharp, calculating the worth of every compliment. She was the lily of the social scene, pure and untouched, or so they believed. To her, this adoration was not a gift, it was her due. And standing somewhere in her shadow, she assumed, would be Larret, her drab, gloomy friend, the soil that made the lily look brighter by comparison. But then, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. It started as a ripple near the grand entrance, a sudden hush that spread like a wave, silencing conversations and freezing wine glasses midair. The string quartet faltered for a beat before recovering, but by then, no one was listening to the music. "Who on earth is that lady?" Someone whispered, the sound carrying in the sudden quiet. Heads turned, eyes widened. Descending the grand staircase was a woman who commanded the darkness as effortlessly as Serafina commanded the light. For years, the social circle had known Larret as a ghost, a girl with hunched shoulders, hair that hung like a curtain over her face, and dresses that looked like potato sacks dyed in gloom. They called her Serafina's shoe wiper, but the woman standing at the top of the stairs bore no resemblance to a ghost. She was a vision of the night sky. Her posture was straight, her chin lifted with a newfound dignity that bordered on defiance. Her raven-black hair, usually a tangled mess, was thickly braided and coiled elegantly, adorned with delicately crafted diamond ornaments that scattered light like stars caught in a dark web. And the dress. It was a masterpiece of silver silk and tulle, hazy and ethereal like the morning mist. It floated around her as she took a step down, the fabric catching the candlelight and shimmering with every movement. "This can't be," a nobleman muttered, blinking as if to clear a hallucination. "That lady is Lady Ansi, the one who used to be so gloomy and dull." The gentlemen who had been swarming around Serafina found their heads turning, their attention pulled away by this magnetic new presence. The ladies, with their sharper eyes for fashion, gasped in recognition. "That dress, isn't it Madame Sauvernose?" One hissed behind her fan. "And that diamond hairpiece, it's the latest from the Chelseany brand." Another replied, her voice tinged with envy. From head to toe, Larret was draped in the finest luxury the empire had to offer. She descended the stairs not with the hesitation of a shoe wiper, but with the grace of a queen. Serafina stood frozen. The smile on her face stiffened, the corners twitching as she fought to maintain her mask. Her gaze, usually so warm, turned cold as ice as it swept over her friend. The spotlight had shifted, and for the first time in her life, Serafina felt the chill of the shadows. She recovered quickly. She had to. Putting on a bright, concerned smile, she approached Larret, cutting through the murmuring crowd. "Larry," Serafina cooed, reaching out as if to touch her, though she stopped short. "You must have been really looking forward to today's ball. You put in so much effort." Her tone was friendly, sugar-sweet, but her eyes were scanning Larret up and down, filled with a condescending pity. She leaned in close, lowering her voice, so only those nearby could hear the venom disguised as advice. But what should we do? Serafina sighed dramatically. That dress and those jewels, I don't think they suit you very well. Larret looked at Serafina. Her face remained expressionless, a calm mask that gave nothing away. Serafina took this silence as submission and pressed on, her eyebrows drooping in mock sympathy. Honestly, Larry, your face is a little plain. Wouldn't an outfit this flashy feel a bit out of place? The surrounding nobles shifted uncomfortably. Serafina's words were cruel, but she delivered them with such tender concern that it was hard to fault her. If you were going to spend so much money anyway, you should have told me, Serafina continued, placing a hand on her chest. Then I could have picked a dress and jewels that really suit you. Click, click. The sharp, rhythmic sound of heels striking the marble floor cut through Serafina's monologue like a blade. Did you say that so I could hear it? A voice rang out, arrogant, clear, and utterly terrifying. The crowd parted instantly. Walking toward them was Evangeline Claudius, the rose of the empire to Serafina's lily. She was the only daughter of the Duke, a woman who possessed beauty, status, and wealth in equal, overwhelming measure. Her honey-blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves, and her eyes glittered like sapphires. She stopped beside Larret, her blue eyes looking down at Serafina with undisguised contempt. "Why, young Lady Claudius?" Serafina stammered, her face paling. Evangeline didn't bother with greetings. She stood tall, radiating the authority of the ducal house. "Today's Larry," she announced to the room, her voice sharp, from head to toe, was dressed by my own hands. A gasp rippled through the hall. Serafina looked as though she had been slapped. "Pardon?" Serafina squeaked. Evangeline took a step closer to Serafina, her gaze piercing. "And yet, in front of everyone, to go on and on about how the dress doesn't suit her." She tilted her head, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Isn't that just a roundabout way of insulting my taste as not refined?" That can't be." Serafina waved her hands frantically, her composure cracking. "I was only—" But Evangeline had already dismissed her. She turned her back on Serafina and looked at Larret, her expression softening just a fraction. To my eyes, Larry looks very beautiful." She turned to the crowd, challenging them with a smile. "What do the rest of you think?" The nobles, terrified of offending the house of Claudius, nodded vigorously. "Of course, you're absolutely right. I had no idea Lady Ansi could be so beautiful. Your aesthetic sense is truly remarkable, young lady." Evangeline's smile deepened, but her eyes remained cold as they flicked back to Serafina. "Honestly, to my eyes, Larry looks much more beautiful than Lady Lopez." Silence, absolute suffocating silence. Evangeline had not called her Lady Ansi, she had called her Larry. A nickname. Evangeline Claudius, who never let anyone close, had just publicly declared Larret to be under her protection. Serafina trembled. She bit her lip, tears welling up in her deep green eyes. Her ultimate weapon. "Larry, that's so cruel," she whispered, her voice shaking. "How can you do this between friends? I only wanted to help you, but just because you've become close with the young lady to ignore me." She couldn't attack the Duke's daughter, so she aimed for the easy target. She tried to frame Larret as the betrayer, but Evangeline was faster. "Lady Lopez, isn't that a very childish way to think?" She scoffed. "You've had your debutante ball and been an adult for quite some time now. How long will you keep sorting people into my friend and your friend?" Evangeline clicked her tongue, a sound of pure dismissal. How petty. Serafina's face flushed hot red. The humiliation was total. Evangeline grabbed Larret's arm. "I no longer feel any value in mixing words with Lady Lopez. Come, Larry." "Yes, young lady," Larret replied, a bright, genuine smile breaking through her stoic mask. The two women walked away, leaving Serafina standing alone in the center of the ballroom, the stares of the crowd pricking her like needles. They walked until they reached a sparsely populated garden terrace, away from the prying eyes. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine. Evangeline stopped abruptly and let go of Larret's hand. She turned away, staring into the darkness of the garden, her voice reverting to a prim, defensive tone. "About that dress," Evangeline started, not looking at Larret. "Don't think I got it for you because I like you. It's because it's embarrassing if the person standing beside me is dressed too shabbily, so I matched you up, that's all." Larret watched her, amused. The terrifying Villainess was shy. Evangeline glared at a rosebush as if it had offended her, then reached out and tightly clasped Larret's hand again. so don't go anywhere else and stay right by my side. Understood. Larret looked down at their joined hands. For the first time in her two lives, the one in the book and the one she was living now, she felt a warmth that wasn't fake. Of course, Larret said, smiling brightly, because I only have Eva. Chapter 2. The first time the cracks appeared in my reality, it wasn't during a grand storm or a tragic accident. It happened on a day that was aggressively, blindingly perfect. It was the day of Countess Johansson's spring picnic. The garden was a masterpiece of manicured nature. A gentle spring breeze, carrying the sweet, heavy scent of blooming lilacs and fresh grass, swept through the grounds, rustling the lace tablecloths and the silk ribbons of the ladies' hats. Sunlight filtered through the emerald leaves of the towering oak trees, dappling the ground in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. On our table, the spread was nothing short of a still life painting brought to existence. Porcelain teacups with delicate floral rims sat on saucers so thin they looked translucent. Silver-tiered stands groaned under the weight of colorful macarons, glistening fruit tarts, and scones still warm from the oven. The steam curling from the teapot smelled of bergamot and honey. And in the center of this picture-perfect scene, I sat like a smudge of gray paint on a vibrant canvas, watching my fiancé and my best friend exist in a world built only for two. My, oh my, Sierra. My fiancé, Gregory Gusto, leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave into a tone I recognized instantly. It was the voice one used for fragile, precious things. He reached for a pile of velvet cushions from a nearby empty chair. Here, let me fix this for you, he murmured. With the dedication of a servant attending a queen, Gregory began to prop the cushions behind Serafina's back. 1, 2, 3 cushions. He didn't just place them, he fluffed them, arranged them, and tucked them in to ensure not a single inch of the wooden chair could graze her spine. Gregor! Serafina giggled, the sound light and airy like wind chimes. That's too many. I'm going to disappear into the feathers. Nonsense, Gregory insisted, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of discomfort. Aren't you tired from sitting so long? The carriage ride was bumpy. You need the support. I sat across from them, my hands folded in my lap, watching this performance. A strange, cold sensation began to pool in my stomach. Those cushions, I thought, glancing around the garden. Didn't he just take the ones meant for the other guests? I wasn't the only one noticing. A few tables away, a group of noblewomen whispered behind their fans, their eyes darting toward our table with undisguised disapproval. Gregory was making a scene, hoarding the comforts for Serafina while leaving everyone else, including his own fiancé, to sit on hardwood. But Gregory was oblivious to the world outside of Serafina's orbit. Serafina widened her eyes, those famous, deep green eyes that poets in the capital wrote bad verses about, and looked up at him with shimmering gratitude. Ahaha, thank you. Her laughter rang out again, piercing the blue sky. Gregor, you're really so kind. No one takes care of me like you do. It's only natural, he replied, his face flushing with pleasure. I blinked slowly. Only natural. I looked down at my own teacup. My tea had gone cold. No one had offered to refill it. No one had asked if I was comfortable. In fact, Gregory hadn't looked at me once since we sat down. A powerful, jarring sense of wrongness seized me. It wasn't just jealousy, it was confusion. Even if we had been childhood friends since we were toddlers, the inseparable trio, there were lines, weren't there. Calling a friend's fiancé by a pet name like Gregor so casually in public, and for a fiancé to fuss over a female friend while ignoring his intended. Isn't this a bit much? I wanted to scream, but my voice stuck in my throat. Gregory didn't stop there. He turned his attention to the tiered stand. His hand hovered over the sweets before selecting a slice of lemon cake, moist, yellow, and topped with a sugary glaze that glistened in the sun. Sierra likes refreshing snacks, right? He said softly, his eyes dripping with honeyed affection. I remember you said the tartness helps with the heat. Want to try this? He didn't just pass the plate. He placed it directly in front of her, cutting a small piece with a silver fork and holding it out, hovering it near her lips. Here, say ah. I stared at the lemon cake. For the record, I thought bitterly, I like lemon cake too, but to Gregory I was invisible. I was part of the furniture, a silent witness to their romance. You know, Gregor, Serafina said after swallowing the cake, dabbing the corner of her pink lips with a napkin. She blinked her long lashes prettily. Sitting like this, it reminds me of the old days. Gregory's expression softened into nostalgia, Right, we used to go out on little outings like this when we were kids too, just the three of us. The three of us, I repeated silently. Hey, I was there too, you know. I'm right here now, but they were already drifting off into a world of their own, a shared past where I was apparently just a footnote. Back then, Serafina sighed, her voice taking on a theatrical sadness. Larry fell into the water. Do you remember? I flinched. The memory of the freezing cold pond water rushed back to me. That's right. Gregory chimed in immediately, his brow furrowing as he finally turned to look at me. But his gaze wasn't kind. It was reproachful. And while saving Larret, you even got a scar on your pretty knee, Sera. He reached out and lightly touched the fabric of Serafina's dress over her knee, as if the wound were still fresh and bleeding, rather than a faint white line from a decade ago that required a magnifying glass to see. Gregory shot me a glare, sharp and accusing. Larret, he barked, his voice losing all the softness he had used with Serafina. You're alive to this day thanks to Sera. She jumped in to save you. You must never forget that. Be grateful. Got it? Why, yes, I stammered. I reflexively lowered my eyes and hunched my shoulders. It was a conditioned response. My body reacted before my brain could process the indignity. I made myself small, apologetic, pathetic. Grateful. Yes, I have to be grateful. But as I stared at the grass beneath my feet, a question began to circle in my head, buzzing like a persistent fly. I keep groveling to Serafina and Gregory. Is this really right? The memory they were discussing played out in my mind, but this time, the fog of gratitude lifted, revealing the sharp edges of reality. Here is what actually happened. We were 7 years old. The three of us were playing near the estate's pond. Serafina saw a cluster of blue water lilies blooming in the center, just out of reach. I want those, she had whined, stomping her little foot. I want the pretty flowers. Gregor, get them for me. Gregory, cowardly even then, was afraid of the dark water, so he had turned to me and shoved my back hard. You go, Larry. Sera wants them. I had stumbled, lost my footing on the mossy stones, and plunged into the icy water. I flailed, gasping for air, swallowing mud. And Serafina, she hadn't jumped in. She had reached out a long stick from the safety of the bank. Grab it, she had yelled. When I grabbed it, the force pulled her forward slightly, and she scraped her knee on a rock. That was it. That was the heroic sacrifice. Wait a minute. The realization hit me so hard I almost dropped my fork. If we're being precise, I fell in because of Serafina's greed and Gregory's push. And in that situation, if they hadn't even tried to pull me out with a stick, wouldn't that have made them literal monsters? Saving me wasn't a favor. It was the bare minimum after causing the accident. Crack, I heard it. I felt it. Something deep inside my mind, a wall that had stood for my entire life, split wide open. Why have I only been grateful to Serafina all this time? I slowly furrowed my brow, the passive expression on my face twisting into a frown. For years, I had worshipped her as my savior. I had let them hold that debt over my head to make me obedient. A powerful sense of absurdity washed over me. Why had I held no resentment? Why had I accepted this narrative so blindly? It was as if someone had forcibly drawn my limits for me, programmed me to be the subservient friend. But the programming was glitching. Just then, Serafina, who had been chattering and laughing with Gregory, glanced back at me. She must have sensed my silence, or perhaps she just needed something else from her servant. She drooped her eyes, affecting a look of sudden distress. Larry, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I think my shoelace came undone. It feels loose. She pointed a dainty finger at her foot hidden beneath the layers of her dress. Can you tie it for me? Silence stretched between us. There was no please. No, I'm sorry to ask. No, my corset is too tight to bend over. She was sitting in a chair. She could easily lift her foot or bend down. Yet, she asked me, the air of a viscount, her equal in rank technically higher as her father was a baron, to kneel in the dirt. And yet my body moved. I stood up obediently and walked around the table. I crouched down in front of Serafina. It was muscle memory. It was the script I had followed for 18 years. As I knelt in the grass, lowering my head to the level of her feet, I heard it. From the table behind us, the hushed, cruel whispers of the other nobles drifted through the air. Seriously, look at that. It looks like Lady Ansi has no pride at all, doesn't it? The voices were trying to suppress laughter, but the mockery leaked through. She's the heir of House Ansi, but she's sitting on the ground to tie a baron's daughter's shoelaces. It's pathetic, truly. Anyone would think she's Lady Lopez's maid, not her friend. Yes, right, I thought, staring at the hem of Serafina's dress. I agree. I don't know why I'm doing this either. The murmurs shifted from my behavior to my appearance. And that tacky dress. Is she wearing a potato sack? From what era is that trend? And what about her hair? I don't get why she lets it hang down like a curtain. Can she even see properly? Well, that's why young Master Gusto only circles around Lady Lopez, isn't it? She can't even keep hold of her fiancé. What a sorry sight. The words stung, but they also felt strangely familiar. They echoed the very things Serafina told me in private. Larry, your face is plain, so darker, duller colors suit you much better. Let your hair hang long. You're shy, so if you hide your face, you can avoid people's eyes. Jewelry, oh, Larry, isn't that a bit too much for you? It would suit me better. One of the noblewomen giggled, a sharp sound like glass breaking. With Lady Ansi beside her, it feels like Lady Lopez's beauty stands out even more. Isn't that so? She's like a shadow to emphasize the light. A shadow, a foil, a prop. At that moment, the world seemed to freeze. The wind stopped. The chatter faded into a dull roar. All the wrongness I had felt until now crashed over my mind as a singular, powerful question. Why am I crouching here like this? Why did I think I had to unconditionally look good to Serafina? Why do I dress like a ghost? Why is Gregory the male lead in my life when he treats me like dirt? Because I owe Serafina my life? No. A thunderbolt of realization struck down, illuminating the dark corners of my consciousness. It wasn't just a memory, it was knowledge. Knowledge that didn't belong to Larret Ansi, because this world is inside a book I read in my previous life. The title flashed in my mind, bold and cursive. The plot unfolded in my memory like a map. The heroine of this world was Serafina Lopez. She was a low-ranking noble with a heart of gold, supposedly, and unmatched beauty. With the help of her loyal childhood friends, me and Gregory, she makes her debut. She gains everyone's love. She overcomes the wicked villainess Evangeline Claudius. She lives happily ever after. And me? Who was I, Serafina's close childhood friend, Larret? The girl who treasured Serafina more than her own body. The girl who envied her friend but served her faithfully. The girl who gladly gets cursed at, slapped, and drenched with water in Serafina's place. The girl who smiles stupidly at the end and says, Sera, as long as you're happy, I'm fine. I was a character created solely for Serafina's happiness. A suffocatingly frustrating stepping stone. A human prop with no agency, no future, and no spine. That Larret was me. I looked up from the ground. My hands were hovering over Serafina's shoes, and that's when I saw it. The final insult. The shoelaces were perfectly tied. They weren't loose. They weren't undone. They were tied in a pristine, double-knotted bow. Serafina hadn't asked me to kneel because she needed help. She had asked me to kneel because she wanted to see me on my knees. She wanted to show the world and Gregory exactly where I belonged, beneath her feet. Chapter 3. The realization didn't come as a whisper. It arrived with the violence of a physical blow. I was kneeling in the grass, my knees pressing into the damp earth through the fabric of my dress. My hands were hovering over Serafina's shoes, trembling slightly, not from the exertion, but from the sudden, blinding clarity of what I was seeing. What is this? I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light. But the sunlight was unforgivingly bright, illuminating every detail. Serafina's shoelaces were not undone. They weren't even loose. They were tied into a meticulous, perfect ribbon, a double knot that wouldn't have slipped even if she had run a marathon, let alone sat in a garden chair for an hour. She definitely said her shoelaces were undone, I thought, the memory of her pitiful voice echoing in my ears. Larry, can you tie it for me? Slowly, I raised my head. The movement felt heavy, as if the air around me had turned to syrup. Serafina was looking down at me. She was still chatting with Gregory, her head tilted at a charming angle, but her eyes, those deep green eyes, were fixed on me. They weren't filled with gratitude. They were filled with amusement. It was a look of absolute, undeniable superiority, the look a queen gives to a servant she has successfully put in their place. In that instant, I felt as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head. My mind snapped awake, shedding the fog of a lifetime of subservience. The shoelaces were just an excuse, I realized, my breath hitching in my throat. She only wanted to make me kneel at her feet. It wasn't just today. The memories came flooding back, a montage of humiliation disguised as friendship. The debutante ball where she convinced me to wear a dress that washed me out because dark colors suit you better. The way she applied my makeup with her own hands, leaving me looking blotchy and stained while she glowed like a pearl. The way she kept me tucked by her side at every banquet, not for companionship, but for contrast. Just as starlight is more beautiful against the pitch-black void, and a flower's splendor stands out because of the dull green calyx beneath it. To Serafina, I was that kind of existence. I was a role, a prop, a background character meant solely to make Serafina stand out. So that's what it was, huh? I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. I had always felt out of place in this world, forced into an orbit around Serafina's sun. I had been terrified of being pushed out, of losing my best friend and my fiancé. But looking at that perfect knot, and then up at her smug face, something broke. Why should I care about that anymore? My hands stopped trembling. A cold, reckless fury took over. I didn't reach for the loops of the bow. Instead, I wrapped my fingers around her slender ankle, and I yanked, hard. Kaya! The scream ripped through the serene garden like a tearing sheet. It was a grand, ungraceful sound that shattered the polite ambience of the picnic. Serafina, who had been leaning back in her cushioned fortress, toppled backward. The chair tipped. Her legs flew up. For a split second, the lily of the social scene was airborne. And then, thud. She landed on her back, staring up at the blue sky with a stunned, vacuous expression. Arms splayed, legs kicked up. She looked exactly like a frog that had been flipped over by a mischievous child's stone. It was a thoroughly ridiculous sight. It didn't suit the delicate, fragile Serafina at all. Silence descended on the garden, but only for a heartbeat. "Oh my, Lady Lopez." PFFT. "Hey, are you all right, PFFHT?" The concerned questions were choked off by snorts. Shoulders were shaking. Fans were snapped open to hide trembling lips. The nobles who had been judging me moments ago were now desperately trying to hold back explosions of laughter. Serafina's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "Larret?" Gregory sprang up from his seat as if the chair were on fire. Remarkably, in a garden full of people suppressing giggles, Gregory alone was immune to the humor. His face was twisted in genuine horror. "Is that what you call true love?" I thought dryly, standing up and brushing the dirt from my knees. "It isn't even funny. What do you think you're doing?" Gregory shouted, his eyes bulging. He rushed to Serafina's side, his gaze achingly tender, as if she were a porcelain doll that had shattered into a million pieces. "Sera, are you okay?" "Ah!" Serafina groaned. Supported by Gregory's trembling arms, she staggered to her feet. She leaned heavily into his chest, trembling like a newborn fawn caught in a storm. It was a masterful performance. She moistened her eyes on cue and murmured, loud enough for the audience to hear, "My goodness, Gregor, I was so startled." My brow twitched. Impressive, I noted. Even in the middle of this humiliation, she diligently keeps up her pure and pitiable act. "I feel dizzy too, and my heart is pounding so much," she whispered, clutching her chest. "Doctor. We have to call a doctor." Gregory bellowed, creating a fuss that echoed off the garden walls. "No, I can't ruin the picnic's atmosphere because of me." Serafina shook her head, lowering her eyes pitifully. "Larret, how are you going to take responsibility for this?" Gregory spun around, pointing a finger directly at my face. What if Sera had gotten seriously hurt? Huh! He was still calling her Sera and me Larret, the nickname for the friend, the full name for the fiancé. The persistence was almost admirable. Please don't worry too much, young Master Gusto." Countess Johansson, the hostess of the picnic, stepped forward. Her face was uncomfortable. This was her event, her garden, and Gregory was screaming in it. "I've made every preparation so that our precious guests won't be hurt, so," she began. "What do you mean, every preparation with nothing but a rug?" Gregory cut her off, his voice cracking with rage. "Sera is frail. Even a small shock can seriously injure her." The atmosphere turned from amused to icy in a nanosecond. Wow, I thought, stunned. Nothing but a rug. Gregory had just openly insulted the hostess, implying her hospitality was cheap and dangerous. Did the man have no tact at all? Countess Johansson had laid down thick, expensive rugs over a lawn she had tended like a child. Murmurs of dissatisfaction rippled through the crowd. "Isn't that a bit excessive?" a noblewoman muttered. He put a pile of cushions behind Lady Lopez's back. "Exactly. Young Master Gusto took them all, so other people can't even use any." Another added. "That's right. You couldn't get hurt even if you tried." A third agreed. It was true. Serafina had been swaddled in so many cushions that she probably would have survived a fall from a second-story window, let alone a 2-foot drop onto soft grass. I glanced at Countess Johansson. Her face was flashing between red and blue in real time. If rumors spread that a guest was injured at her picnic, her reputation as a hostess would be stained. Then I should show the opposite of Gregory, I decided. I clasped my hands together and bowed my head politely to the Countess. "I'm sorry, Countess Johansson," I said, my voice clear and remorseful. "My hand slipped because of my mistake, and I've caused you worry." Countess Johansson's expression softened slightly. I had given her a way out. I had taken the blame so she wouldn't have to be the villain. Then I turned to Serafina. I put on my best guilty expression, a mirror of the one she had used on me so many times. "And I'm sorry to you too, Serafina. I didn't realize you'd fall like that." "How would Sera fall while you're tying her shoelaces?" Gregory shouted, still oblivious to the room. "Oh, you said that well," I thought, hiding a smirk behind a feigned gasp of distress. I covered my mouth with my hand, acting flustered. "Ah, well," I trailed off, looking confused. "Your shoelaces were tied perfectly." The words hung in the air. People looked back and forth between Serafina and me. The doubt was instantaneous and visible. Didn't Lady Lopez say earlier that her shoelaces were undone?" Someone whispered. "That's right, I'm sure I heard that too." Another confirmed. Countess Johansson, whose pride had already been pricked by Gregory, bristled. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at Serafina. "Lady Lopez," the Countess asked sharply, "did you deliberately make Lady Ancy kneel?" The question was a dagger. "Oh, come on, there's no way." Serafina's defenders waved their hands hurriedly. There must have been some misunderstanding. Most people still believed in the innocent Serafina, but the seed had been planted. I watched Serafina's face pale. Even if they didn't believe me fully, I was satisfied. Just making the words she deliberately made her friend kneel exist in the air was enough. The crack in her perfect image had begun, and I was the one holding the hammer. Chapter 4, the garden was still buzzing with the aftermath of the accident. Serafina, who had been maintaining her pitiful expression, eyes wet, lips trembling, suddenly let her mask slip. For a fraction of a second, her face scrunched up in genuine, ugly irritation. I saw it, and for the first time I didn't fear it. I continued speaking, my voice calm and carrying clearly over the murmurs of the crowd. I only tugged lightly to check whether the shoelace was really undone. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air like smoke. But Serafina is so frail that I guess she toppled backward from just that. I made sure to catch Gregory's eye as I said it. He looked apoplectic, his face a mottled red, but I simply glanced sidelong at Serafina. "Of course, Serafina," I said, offering her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You'll surely understand this kind of tiny mistake between friends. Because we're friends, right?" I returned the very words she used against me like a weapon. I dipped my head slightly, not out of respect, but to hide the smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. It was a heady feeling, this new power. "I still thought I should apologize," I said, straightening up. "I'm really sorry." Serafina glared at me. It was a murderous look, sharp enough to cut glass. Yet, astoundingly, while her eyes were screaming for blood, the rest of her face remained composed. It was a terrifying disconnect. Do you have to be at that level to become a female lead who wins everyone's affection? I wondered dryly. Her commitment to the role was almost admirable. Ignoring her glare, I turned to the hostess. "Countess Johansson, I'll take my leave now." The Countess looked flustered. "But Lady Ancy." After causing such a commotion, I interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm not shameless enough to keep attending the picnic." The sentence was a double-edged sword. By leaving, I was taking the moral high ground. By staying, Gregory and Serafina were implicitly labeling themselves as the shameless ones who remained to eat cake after a public scandal. I saw their faces twist as the realization hit them. HMPH, serves you right, I thought. With a final, graceful nod, I turned on my heel and slipped out of the picnic, leaving the chaos behind me. From that day on, I became a recluse. I shut myself up in the townhouse, cutting off all contact with the outside world. It was a self-imposed exile, and it was glorious. "Miss," my maid Amy said, entering my room with a silver tray piled high with envelopes. Her face was weary. Letters keep coming from Lady Lopez and young Master Gusto. I was sitting at my desk, dipping a quill into an inkpot. I didn't even look up. "Oh, that," I replied flatly, scratching out a sentence on the parchment before me. "Shove them into the fireplace." Amy hesitated, but I didn't twitch an eyebrow. I knew what they contained. demands for apologies, guilt trips, gaslighting. They're probably just telling me to apologize to them, whatever, I thought. I had more urgent matters to attend to. The document in front of me was far more important than their bruised egos. I was drafting the official annulment of my engagement to Gregory Gusto. Honestly, viewing it without the filter of love or duty, there was nothing holding me back. Gregory was the second son of a count. He had no title to inherit, no estate of his own. I, on the other hand, was the heir of a viscount's house. I had land. I had a title waiting for me. The engagement had never been about love. It was a calculation. Gregory maintained the relationship because he calculated that if he married me, he could become Viscount Ansi. It was so blatant that even my parents had tried to warn me, asking if Gregory didn't seem to prefer Serafina. I was a fool, I admitted to myself, but at least I can fix it. Since the engagement was only a verbal promise between families, a sternly worded letter was enough to shatter it. If we had been married, if the imperial family had notarized it, I shuddered. I would have been trapped as Gregory's unloved wife. As the fire in the hearth consumed Gregory's unread letters, I leaned back and thought about the original story. The novel didn't care about logic. It ignored plausibility to pour every benefit onto the heroine, Serafina, and in doing so, it showed no mercy to the supporting characters. I wasn't the only victim of this narrative bias. There was another, Evangeline Claudius. She was the younger sister of the Duke of Claudius, one of the male leads. In the book, she was the Villainess, the obstacle, the thorn in Serafina's side. Currently, we were at the beginning of the story. Serafina hadn't even met the Duke yet, but the rumors were already starting. The social circles were buzzing with whispers that the young lady of Claudius was arrogant, insolent, and difficult. In the novel, these rumors pushed the Duke to threaten his sister. Restore your reputation or I will cut off your allowance. For Evangeline, who lived for fashion and style, this was a death sentence. Come to think of it, I tapped the quill against my chin. Serafina was involved in that rumor, wasn't she? Serafina never openly spread rumors. She was too smart for that. Instead, she used her pure, pitiable image. She would tremble when Evangeline's name was mentioned. She would look downcast. She steered people into quietly shunning the young lady, exploiting the fear people naturally felt toward the lofty house of Claudius. In the book, this was framed as justice, the villainess getting what she deserved. But looking at it now, from the perspective of a fellow victim, isn't she just a terrible person? I thought, my blood boiling. Evangeline hadn't actually harmed Serafina yet. She just didn't like her. If you really thought about it, Evangeline Claudius was just another casualty of the heroine buff. Another woman sacrificed so Serafina could shine. Ah, I hate it so much. I slammed the quill down. I wanted to see Serafina's face crumple. I wanted to see her lose. After years of being her shoe wiper, surely I was allowed that much vindictiveness. In that case, my eyes lit up with a dangerous idea. What if I allied with the Villainess? Evangeline needs to restore her reputation. I need revenge. We could scratch each other right where it itches. I grabbed a fresh sheet of paper. My hand moved furiously, fueled by adrenaline and spite. To the esteemed young lady of Claudius, I know a way to restore your young ladyship's reputation. I didn't hesitate. I sealed the letter and sent it off before my courage could fail. The next morning, the adrenaline crashed. I buried my head deep into my pillow, groaning into the feathers. What on earth have I done? House Claudius was not just a noble family. They were the noble family, the only ducal house in the empire comparable to royalty. Most people couldn't even look them in the eye. Serafina could rival them only because the plot demanded it. But me, Larret Ansi, a provincial viscount's daughter, I had dared to propose a deal to the most powerful woman in society. It was madness. Even Amy had looked at me like I was insane. Miss, are you really going to send this letter? She had asked, holding the envelope as if it were a bomb. Of course, the young lady must receive that letter, got it? I had shouted, pushed by my anger. Now, in the cold light of day, I regretted it so much I wanted to die. Ah, this is a dream. It has to be a dream, I mumbled, clutching my blankets. In romance fantasies, heroines regress in time constantly. Couldn't I regress just one day? Just 24 hours to stop myself from sending that suicidal letter. It wasn't enough that I was reborn as an extra who gets treated like a worn-out shoe. Now I was piling up embarrassing history in real time. Should I go back to my hometown right now? I wondered frantically. My parents wouldn't cast me out, right? just as I was contemplating fleeing the capital to live as a sheep farmer. Knock, knock. A short, sharp sound echoed from the door. "Miss." Amy's voice drifted through the wood. She sounded troubled, hesitant. "A guest has come to see you." My heart stopped. A guest, now. There was only one person who could make Amy sound that nervous. The response to my letter had arrived. Chapter 5, the lingering regret of sending that reckless letter to the Duke's sister was a heavy weight on my chest, but it was abruptly shattered by a sharp, urgent sound. Knock, knock. I rose slowly from my bed, my raven hair falling around my shoulders in a tousled, chaotic mess. I hadn't even brushed it yet. The morning light filtering through the heavy drapes was faint, matching my mood. "A guest," I called out, my voice flat and devoid of any welcoming warmth. "I'm sure I told you to refuse all visitors." From the other side of the heavy oak door, my maid Amy's voice drifted in. She sounded deeply troubled, her usual brisk efficiency replaced by a hesitant tremor. "Yes, miss, but they forced their way in," she explained, the apology clear in her tone. I froze. The list of people in the capital, who possessed the sheer audacity to force their way into Viscount Ansie's private townhouse, as if it were their own property, was incredibly short. In fact, up until this very moment, there were only 2 people in the entire world I had ever foolishly granted that kind of unconditional access. A cold, bitter laugh threatened to escape my lips. "Serafina and Gregory?" I asked, my tone turning to ice. "Yes, miss," Amy answered anxiously from the hallway, confirming my worst suspicions. My immediate instinct was to march down the stairs and order the guards to throw them out into the street. But reason, cold and calculating, quickly took over. Even setting aside Serafina's family, the Lopez barony, which carried only the hollow, impoverished name of a baron, there was the matter of Gregory. House Gusto was a count's house, holding a definitively higher standing in society than my own House Ansie. If I picked a public fight for no strategic reason, it would become an unnecessary hassle. I needed to handle this with a different kind of blade. "I'm not feeling well, so I don't have the energy to come down to the drawing room," I answered sulkily, raising my voice just enough for Amy to hear. I paused, letting the implication form in my mind before I delivered the order. "So if they truly have something to say, tell them to come up to my bedroom." In the rigid hierarchy of high society, etiquette was everything. Meeting a guest while wearing sleepwear, lounging in your own bed, was an ultimate display of power, a privilege strictly reserved for the higher-ranked side. It silently communicated a devastating message. "You are so insignificant to me that I do not even need to tidy my clothes or present myself formally to meet you." It was an insult wrapped in silk. It was a situation that Gregory and Serafina, with their inflated egos and desperate need for validation, could never accept without damaging their pride. "Then I will relay that," Amy said. I listened to the rhythmic thud of her footsteps receding down the corridor. Leaning back against the plush velvet headboard, I grinned to myself. I honestly believed that, if only out of sheer pride, those 2 wouldn't dare crawl all the way up the stairs to my private bedroom. I underestimated their sheer audacity. Mere minutes later, the door flew open with a violent bang. "Larret, what in the world is this rudeness?" Gregory charged into the room like an angry bull, his chest heaving, his eyes bulging as he glared at me. He gestured wildly at my nightgown. "Instead of even changing your clothes, you're greeting us while lying in bed." I didn't flinch. I didn't scramble to cover myself with a shawl. I simply stayed exactly where I was, leaning back against my soft pillows. I let my shoulders slump, widening my eyes as I looked up at the 2 of them, carefully constructing a perfectly pitiful expression. "Serafina, you're not the only one who can act, you know," I thought, feeling a wicked thrill. "I can play the victim, too." "But," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "you're the ones who came all the way up here even though I sent word that I was sick." I brought a hand to my chest. "I thought you were coming to visit me because you cared, so I was nothing but grateful." A visit. The word hung in the air. At that single word, the color drained from Gregory and Serafina's faces, shifting rapidly from furious red to a pale, humiliated blue. I chuckled to myself behind my mask of innocence. Why did they think I made the excuse that I was sick in the first place? It was all a setup to use this exact leverage against them. "I thought you came without even making an appointment because you were so worried about me," I continued softly, twisting the knife. So I felt terrible that you'd made a wasted trip to my home and I called you into my bedroom so you wouldn't leave empty-handed. Cough. I coughed, deliberately, loudly enough for it to echo in the quiet room. For the record, there wasn't a single thing wrong with my health. I was practically glowing. For days, I had shut myself safely away in my townhouse. I had eaten my meals properly, enjoyed sweet snacks whenever I was bored, and slept deeply without the constant stress of catering to their whims. Because of that luxurious rest, my skin right now was as smooth and flawless as a peeled egg. Anyway, Gregory interrupted, clearing his throat with a loud hum. He puffed out his chest, raising his voice for no logical reason other than to assert dominance. Do you have any idea how awkward it was for us after you left the picnic like that? I stared at him blankly. So what am I supposed to do about it? I conveyed the thought entirely through my silent, unblinking gaze. Interpreting my silence however he pleased, Gregory seemed to draw more strength into his broad shoulders. He pointed a finger at me. I'm really disappointed in you. I think I need to reconsider our engagement too. He scoffed, looking at my messy hair. I can't keep an engagement with an unrefined woman like you anymore. I'm going to tell father too. Got it. He shouted grandly, puffing out his chest before stealing a quick, nervous glance at my expression to see if his threat had landed. I was simply dumbfounded. What on earth was processing inside his head? Did he genuinely believe that if he spoke strongly, I would burst into tears, cry out, sob, I was wrong, please forgive me just once, and cling to his boots? No, I realized with a sickening jolt. If it were the old me, the pathetic Larret of the past, I might have done exactly that. My brief moment of solemn realization passed quickly. Letting my shoulders droop even further, I spoke in a quiet, defeated whisper. I've actually been thinking a lot because of that day. Thinking a lot, Gregory echoed, his brow furrowing. When Serafina fell, you took such careful, tender care of her, I said softly. At the mention of her humiliating fall, Serafina shot me a dagger-eyed glare from behind Gregory's back. Perhaps the memory of lying on the ground like a flipped frog had just rushed back to her. I didn't care. Honestly, I continued, looking directly into Gregory's eyes. If it were me, and my fiancé was kneeling in the dirt in front of another woman, I'd naturally help her up. That's because Sera is my childhood friend. Gregory stammered quickly, stepping defensively in front of Serafina. MMHM, I understand. I nodded, projecting an aura of profound sorrow. Since you're childhood friends, it's only natural you think of each other as special. I took a deep breath, but I suppose I realized this time just how narrow-minded I am. Gregory, you said you wanted to reconsider your engagement to me, right? I asked, my voice steady. I already sent an annulment letter to house gusto. The silence that followed was deafening, Gregory's jaw practically unhinged. To the utterly stunned man, I added with a generous, sickly sweet smile. Of course, I understand if you haven't checked your mail yet. You must have been incredibly busy taking care of Serafina all this time. Wait, what are you talking about? Gregory mumbled, his brain failing to process the reality where I was dumping him. I didn't let him recover. I shifted my gaze to Serafina, giving a light, dismissive shrug. Then again, Serafina's condition was a little strange that day. How tired must your delicate legs have been to mistake a perfectly tied shoelace for being undone? I tilted my head, feigning deep concern. But you sat all day for the picnic. It's truly odd to say you felt the lace coming undone without even walking. Something might be seriously wrong with your feet, so why don't you go see a doctor? Serafina's beautiful face hardened stiffly, the mask of innocence cracking under the weight of my mockery. At the same time, Gregory finally found his voice. Larret, what on earth have you been saying this whole time? He shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. That I won't keep barging between you two without reading the room. I smiled benignly, like a saint granting a blessing. You said it until your lips wore out, didn't you? That as friends, we ought to wish each other happiness. Larret, so I'm going to wish you two happiness too. Serafina, I truly hope you'll be happy with my fiancé. My smile deepened, reaching my eyes with pure malice. Ah, right, is he my former fiancé now? Stop joking around. Gregory snarled, stepping forward. Just as he was about to raise his voice and likely start breaking things, a frantic voice echoed from the hallway. Miss Larret. Amy came running into the bedroom in an absolute hurry, her breath catching in her throat. I looked at her, adopting a bewildered expression. Amy, what is it? A letter. Amy gasped, holding up a single envelope like it was a holy relic. All eyes in the room snapped to the object in her hands. On the envelope, crafted from stiff, impossibly high-quality parchment, a family crest was stamped perfectly in dark red wax. It was a crest depicting a rose intertwined with a sword. There was only one family in the entire empire that used those two symbols as their sigil. A letter came from House Claudius, Amy announced, her voice trembling with awe. What? My eyes widened in genuine shock. I stared blankly down at the heavy letter placed in my hands. There, written on the elegant envelope in flowing, aristocratic handwriting, was a signature that made my heart stop. Evangeline von Claudius. That's right. The sender of the letter was Evangeline, the one and only noble young lady of the ducal house of Claudius. A suffocating silence blanketed the room. Serafina and Gregory stood frozen, staring at me with blank, uncomprehending faces. House Claudius was the absolute apex of the nobility, a family so exalted they were as distant and untouchable as a star in the night sky. The young lady of Claudius? Serafina whispered after a long, painful silence, speaking for the first time since the revelation. Her voice was strained, her eyes darting between the wax seal and my face. Why would the young lady send you a letter? Oh, this was delightfully unexpected. True to being the beloved heroine who hoarded everyone's affection, Serafina usually managed her pure, pitiable image with terrifying thoroughness. She avoided anything that might tarnish that image, always pushing unpleasant confrontations onto someone else, usually Gregory. So far today, Gregory had done all the shouting while Serafina stayed a step back, playing the fragile victim. And yet here she was, directly and aggressively questioning me. She must be absolutely burning with curiosity and jealousy to know what was written inside. Well, that didn't mean I had any obligation to ease her suffering. Who knows? I said lightly, tracing the edge of the wax seal with my thumb. I don't know either. I shrugged obnoxiously, savoring the look of absolute desperation painting her perfect features. Chapter 6. The silence in my bedroom was so absolute it felt heavy, pressing down on the three of us like a physical weight. Serafina's beautiful face, usually a canvas of practiced innocence, suddenly contorted. The mask slipped completely, revealing something fierce and ugly underneath. "Larry, don't joke around," she snapped, her voice losing its melodic, airy quality. It was hard and demanding. I leaned back against my pillows, twirling the heavy, wax-sealed envelope between my fingers. "I really don't know," I replied, my tone infuriatingly light. After all, it wasn't as if I possessed magical vision to see through the thick parchment. But internally, my stomach was tying itself into agonizing knots. What if this is a death sentence? The thought screamed in my mind, sending a drop of cold sweat racing down the curve of my spine. Maybe the young lady was deeply offended by my impudent letter. Maybe this is a formal protest, demanding I never dare contact her again. House Claudius had the power to crush my small viscounty like a dry leaf. However, looking up at the two people standing at the foot of my bed, my panic began to recede, replaced by a dark, bubbling amusement. Gregory's jaw was still hanging open, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. Serafina's delicate hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides, her knuckles turning white. Their faces were entirely tainted with anxiety and a desperate, clawing jealousy. They were letting their imaginations run wild, likely picturing a reality where I had somehow forged a secret, powerful connection with the untouchable ducal house. Seeing them squirm like this, it felt very, very good. "Larry, you really?" Serafina hissed, taking a step forward. "What on earth did you spout to the young lady?" Gregory demanded, his voice cracking with hysteria. Since it's come to this, should I put on a show no matter what the content is? I thought, a wicked smile playing on my lips. With excruciatingly slow, deliberate movements, I slid my finger under the flap of the envelope. I savored the sharp crack of the red wax breaking. I could feel their gazes stuck to my hands, tracking every millimeter of the stiff paper as I unfolded it. I scanned the elegant, flowing handwriting. I had braced myself for insults, for threats, for a royal decree of excommunication from high society. But as I read the words, my breath caught in my throat, to Lady Ancy. "This is Evangeline. You say something interesting. I am intrigued by it." I blinked. "Intrigued, if possible, could you visit the ducal townhouse today for a short while? I have also sent a carriage. I sincerely hope to meet Lady Ancy as soon as possible." Young Lady Claudius. Evangeline, the words danced before my eyes. She had sent a carriage. Today. I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my composure. I turned my head stiffly toward my maid, who was still standing by the door, trembling with a mixture of awe and fear. I lowered my voice to a barely audible whisper. Amy, did they really send a carriage from the ducal house? Yes. Amy nodded vigorously, her eyes wide as saucers. A thrill of absolute victory shot through my veins. My eyes sparkled with newfound confidence. I slowly folded the letter with dramatic flair, sliding it back into the envelope with a soft SHHK of paper. I looked back and forth between Serafina and Gregory, letting the silence stretch just long enough to torture them. Then I smiled. It was the brightest, most radiant smile I had worn in my entire life. The young lady invited me to the ducal townhouse. I announced, letting the words roll off my tongue like sweet honey. She says she wants to see me alone, just the two of us. What did you say? Gregory roared, his eyes bulging so far out of his head they looked like they might pop. That can't be. Serafina cried out, entirely abandoning her fragile persona as her voice shrilled in the quiet room. I've never even been invited by the young lady a single time. Her chest heaved as she glared at me, her green eyes filled with venom. Honestly, there is no reason for you to receive a letter from the young lady. Ah, I see, I thought, looking at her crookedly. You're thinking, why would someone like me receive attention from the apex of society over someone as beloved as you? I nodded magnanimously, feigning sympathy. I don't know either, but what can you do? That's just how it is. Answering with a perfectly indifferent shrug, I tossed the covers aside and rose gracefully from my bed. So anyway, could you two go back now? What? Gregory stammered, caught off guard by the sudden dismissal. I have to go pay my respects to the young lady now, I stated firmly. It was an unmistakable, undeniable order to leave my house. A rush of exhilarating power washed over me. For years, these two had dismissed me, ignored me, and ordered me around like a stray dog. But never once, not in all my life, had I dared to do it to them. It's a visit to the ducal townhouse, after all. I continued, walking past them to my vanity mirror. I think I'll have a lot to prepare, in many ways. Serafina narrowed her eyes, desperately grasping for a way to maintain control. But Larry, you said you were sick. She challenged, shooting me a sharp, accusatory look. I didn't even twitch an eyebrow. That's true, but it is an invitation from the young lady of Claudius. But. I turned to face her, my expression hardening into something cold and unyielding. You're not telling me to ignore the young lady's invitation, are you? I stepped closer, looking down at her. Serafina, I'm grateful you're so worried about my health, but I don't think it's right to advise me to commit that kind of massive rudeness toward the young lady. For the first time in our lives, Serafina was completely and utterly at a loss for words. And no, I didn't mean that. She sputtered, her silver tongue failing her. I returned a Victor's smile, chilling and bright. I'm glad you didn't mean that. Larry, then could you please leave now? I'm busy, I have to wash up and change clothes, I said, turning my back on them entirely. When Gregory and Serafina stood frozen, too stunned to budge, I clicked my tongue in annoyance. I looked over at my maid. Amy, young Master Gusto and Lady Lopez are leaving now. Escort them out politely. Yes, miss, understood, Amy said. With a fierce gleam in her eye, she rolled up her sleeves, revealing arm muscles built from years of carrying heavy laundry and hauling firewood. Let go. Won't you let go? Gregory yelped as Amy grabbed his arm. Eek! Serafina squeaked as she was ushered out. The two of them were unceremoniously dragged out of my bedroom in a tangled, humiliating muddle. Then have a safe trip home. I called out cheerfully, grabbing the heavy wooden door. Before their terribly distorted, outraged faces could form another word, I slammed the door shut. I leaned my back against the wood, closing my eyes as I caught my breath. I slowly clenched my trembling hands into tight fists. This feels amazing. Just an hour ago, rejecting Serafina had felt as refreshing as chugging a bottle of ice-cold, sparkling water on a summer day. Now, however, the sparkling water had turned to lead in my stomach. What do I do? I thought, my teeth chattering slightly. I was currently riding in a carriage so luxurious it felt like a moving palace, the plush velvet seats bearing the terrifying crest of House Claudius. I was alone in the vast cabin, trembling like a baby rabbit that had just been dropped into a cage with a wild beast. Am I really visiting House Claudius? The late-arriving sense of reality felt like a physical weight trying to crush me to death. This was a ducal house. A family with power so absolute it could make birds fall from the sky with a single word. And the person waiting for me was the young lady herself, the undisputed villainess of this world. She isn't as ill-tempered as she is in the original story, right? I prayed desperately. Wow, am I insane for doing this? Unable to endure the rising tide of my own anxiety, I chewed nervously on my lower lip. I was about to meet the most dangerous woman in the Empire, one-on-one. I tried to reassure myself. It'll be fine. The letter didn't seem particularly angry, so, trying somehow to calm my wildly pounding heart, I looked out the window. Before I knew it, the carriage was smoothly passing through the towering iron-wrought gates of the ducal townhouse. The carriage came to a halt. The door was opened by a liveried servant, and as I stepped down onto the pristine cobblestones, a maid in a crisp uniform bowed so deeply she almost folded in half. "Welcome, Lady Ancy," she murmured respectfully. "The young lady is waiting for you." And so, in the blink of an eye, I found myself walking through the sprawling, opulent estate, marching toward a private meeting with the Empire's one and only young lady. I was led into a sprawling glass conservatory, a vibrant garden where dozens of varieties of roses bloomed in wild, extravagant profusion. The air was thick and sweet with their perfume, and there, sitting at a wrought iron table, was Evangeline von Claudius. She was more breathtakingly beautiful than the roses surrounding her, her sapphire eyes staring straight at me as I approached. "Ah, so you are Lady Ancy?" she asked, her voice cool and composed. I immediately dropped into the deepest, most formal curtsy my legs could manage. "Larret Ancy pays her respects to the young lady of Claudius," I recited hastily, ensuring I offered the proper courtesy to a woman of her exalted station. Evangeline looked at me with a sullen, almost bored face. She pointed a slender, gloved finger to the empty wrought iron chair opposite her. "Sit." "Ah, yes." I sat down reflexively, my back stiff as a board. Sitting across from her, the sheer pressure of her presence, an aura unique to exalted nobility, was suffocating. "Well," Evangeline began, resting her chin on her hand, "I do feel sorry for inviting you so suddenly. Were you startled?" "No," I trailed off without meaning to, my voice failing me. Honestly, the difference in our status was so vast, like an ocean, that I genuinely thought it couldn't be helped even if she chose to completely ignore my existence. But looking at her now, her expression wasn't mocking. Somehow, she almost seemed kind. "Then that's good," she said smoothly. "For tea, which would you like, Darjeeling or Earl Grey?" I blinked, caught off guard. Darjeeling," I answered without thinking. As the word left my mouth, I felt as if I had been physically struck on the head. A sudden, heavy realization crashed over me. Up to this very moment, in all the years I had known them, Serafina and Gregory had never once asked about my tastes or preferences. They simply ordered what they wanted, and I was expected to consume it silently. And yet, the young lady of Claudius, of all people, the dreaded Villainess from the original story, was actively paying attention to what I wanted. What do I do? I think I'm going to be moved to tears, I thought, the tip of my nose stinging with unexpected emotion. As I sat there fighting back the prickling behind my eyes, Evangeline reached out. With graceful, precise movements, she picked up the silver teapot and personally poured the dark, amber liquid into the porcelain cup in front of me. The fragrant, earthy aroma of Darjeeling black tea spread gently through the crisp air. In that moment, startled as if waking from a fever dream, my ingrained reflexes took over. I reached out, my hands waving in a panic to stop her. "Why, young lady?" I gasped, horrified. "For you to pour tea personally for a low-ranking noble like me? It was a violation of the social order. I didn't deserve to be served by royalty." Evangeline paused. The teapot clinked softly against the saucer. She slowly raised her head, looking at me with her head tilted crookedly. The atmosphere chilled instantly. "Are you always that irritating?" she asked, her voice slicing through the sweet air like a razor. "Pardon?" I whispered, freezing in place. Evangeline set the teapot down firmly. "What is so special about pouring a single cup of tea?" she demanded, her blue eyes narrowing. "Why are you suddenly self-deprecating?" I flinched, my shoulders stiffening as I shrank back into my chair. Yeah, why? The question echoed in my mind. If I had to find a reason, it was because of the voices constantly whispering in my ear for the past decade. It was because Serafina and Gregory had drilled it into my skull. Be grateful I'm keeping the engagement with someone as gloomy as you. Gregory's voice sneered in my memory. If it weren't for me, who would even be friends with you? Serafina's sweet, poisonous words echoed right after. I knew it in my head. I logically understood that the way those two had treated me was horrific, and that the young lady pouring tea was simply keeping the basic courtesy one human being shows another. But to actually experience it, this is the first time I realized, staring down at the swirling amber liquid in my cup. For no reason at all, a massive wave of emotion welled up deep inside my chest, threatening to spill over. Sitting across from the so-called villainess of the world, I finally felt like a person. Chapter 7. The silence in the glass conservatory stretched, taut and fragile as a spider's web. Across the wrought iron table, the young lady stared quietly at me, her sharp blue eyes seemingly lost in a labyrinth of her own calculating thoughts. I sat frozen, the delicate porcelain cup trembling slightly in my grasp. The warmth of the tea seeped through the fine china, a stark contrast to the cold knot of anxiety sitting heavy in my stomach. "What are you doing?" Evangeline asked, her voice snapping me out of my stupor. She sounded distinctly sulky, pointing a slender finger at my trembling hands. "Not drinking your tea." "Ah, yes," I murmured, hastily bringing the rim of the cup to my lips. I took a small, careful sip. The liquid flowed over my tongue, and my eyes widened involuntarily. The flavor was a revelation, a perfect, earthy Darjeeling with a complex floral finish that danced on the palate. It wasn't overly sweet, nor was it cloying. It was precisely the kind of tea I loved. A profound, melancholic realization washed over me. Whenever it had been tea time in the past, I had only ever consumed the overly sweetened fruit teas that Serafina and Gregory demanded. For years, my own preferences had been utterly erased from existence. It had been so long since I had been allowed to drink a tea that actually suited my own taste. Evangeline, who had been watching my face with the intense scrutiny of a hawk, suddenly broke the silence. "How does it taste?" she asked. "It's delicious," I whispered, the word carrying a weight of gratitude she couldn't possibly understand. "Well, then that's that," Evangeline answered primly, lifting her chin. With a graceful slide of her hand, she pushed a silver-tiered plate across the table toward me. Arranged beautifully upon it were golden, shell-shaped pastries. "That black tea tastes good with these madeleines." This time, I didn't hesitate. Without offering a performative refusal or waiting for permission as I would have with Serafina, I picked up a madeleine and took a bite. The texture was heavenly, crisp on the edges, giving way to a soft, buttery sweetness that instantly melted in my mouth. A genuine, unrestrained smile bloomed on my lips, chasing away the lingering shadows of my anxiety. "It's delicious," I exclaimed, the joyous exclamation bursting out of me before I could suppress it. For a fleeting second, the impossible happened. A faint, genuine smile spread over Evangeline's usually stoic lips. It softened her sharp features, making her look not like the terrifying apex of society, but like a normal, beautiful girl pleased by a compliment. "Wait," she smiled. Startled, I stared at the young lady with wide, disbelieving eyes. But my reaction was too slow. The moment she noticed me looking, Evangeline had already slammed her emotional walls back up, returning instantly to her pristine, expressionless face. I must have seen it wrong," I thought, blinking rapidly. Yet as I chewed the sweet pastry, a profound question suddenly arose in my mind. The woman sitting across from me was prickly, yes. She was defensive and guarded. But she was certainly not so vicious or ill-tempered that one should fear her as the villainess of the century. Is this the same woman who is destined to ruthlessly torment Serafina, only to be ultimately defeated and thrown into a desolate convent? I went over the original story's plotline again in my head. In the novel, the young lady of Claudius, unable to bear her overwhelming jealousy of Serafina monopolizing her brother's love, causes endless harm to the heroine. In the end, as punishment, she is permanently confined to a convent by her own brother. But I analyzed the current reality. So far, the young lady had not harmed Serafina even once, which meant, just like me, the young lady might have only ended up acting cruelly in the future because she was forced into the role of the villainess of the original work. No, what on earth is that damn wretched original story anyway? I thought, my blood beginning to boil. just because a romance novel requires a dramatic obstacle before the male and female leads can get together. Is it really right that a living, breathing person like Evangeline gets consumed and destroyed as a villainess? It isn't. I scowled inwardly, gripping the delicate handle of my teacup. Even if this entire universe revolved around Serafina, there should be limits to the cruelty inflicted on the rest of us. It was infuriating enough that Serafina, simply by virtue of being the heroine, could effortlessly toy with people's lives. And to lay down a flower-strewn path for her absolute happiness, I was forced to become a miserable shoe wiper, and this proud young lady was destined to be discarded in a convent. That's completely unreasonable. I ground my teeth inwardly, lost in a storm of righteous fury. Just then, Evangeline glanced sideways at me, her sharp gaze cutting through my dark thoughts. I snapped back to my senses, my heart skipping a beat, and hurriedly composed my expression into something pleasantly neutral. Phew, thank goodness, I thought, letting out a silent breath. I almost flew off the handle right in front of the young lady. Come to think of it, Lady Ansi, Evangeline began, her tone shifting. She leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the table. You said you knew a way to restore my reputation, didn't you? Though her tone itself was carefully crafted to sound indifferent, I could hear the faint, desperate expectation mixed in, an anticipation she couldn't quite hide. What is that method? She asked, and somehow her sapphire eyes looked strangely sparkling under the conservatory light. That is, I swallowed my dry saliva. Wow, I feel like I'm going to die of nerves, I panicked internally. What if the young lady laughs at my presumption and orders her guards to throw me out for spouting nonsense? But the words were already bubbling up in my throat. My mouth moved on its own accord. You become my friend, I stated clearly. The moment the answer left my lips, I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact. My brain spun at full speed, automatically conjuring all sorts of horrific, negative reactions. I could practically hear her mocking voice in my head. Ha, you want me and Lady Ansi to be friends? You really do have big dreams, she would snort at me. Or perhaps worse, she might fly into a total rage. You dared ask to meet me privately just to spout such insolent nonsense. But the thunderous scolding I braced for never came. No matter how long I waited, the air remained undisturbed. The young lady simply stayed quiet. And then a calm, soft question floated across the table. Friends? She isn't angry. I cautiously lifted my heavy eyelids. The very instant I opened them, my eyes met the young lady's. Ah, that startled me. My shoulders tensed in reflex. With her expressionless, beautiful face, she truly looked like an ice queen who could freeze a person's soul with her gaze alone. What is that reaction? Evangeline chided me in a flat, unimpressed voice. Am I going to eat Lady Ansi or something? I hurriedly shook my head, my hands waving defensively. And no, it's not that. Enough, she waved her hand dismissively. More importantly, I want to hear why that would be a solution to my reputation. I stole a glance at her mood, ensuring the ice hadn't completely frozen over before I carefully opened my mouth. First, the rumor currently going around high society about you is… The rumor, Evangeline interrupted, swallowing hard. I blinked in surprise. She was normally so impeccably proud that I assumed she didn't care at all about the whispers of lesser nobles, so she was actually worried about it unexpectedly. Is it okay if I speak honestly? I asked gently. If I delivered the raw, unfiltered rumor directly, it might deeply upset her. Luckily, she nodded readily. Of course. They say, how arrogant must you be that you look down on everyone and won't even socialize at all? I explained carefully, watching her reaction. And no, that's… Evangeline gasped, raising her voice and looking utterly, desperately wronged. But almost immediately, perhaps considering her own dignity as the Duke's daughter, she clamped her mouth shut. Enough. It's nothing, she muttered, looking away. What? She has an unexpectedly cute side, I thought, a warm feeling spreading in my chest. She was so much more human, so much more vulnerable than the two-dimensional villainess portrayed in the novel. This is just my thought, I continued, leaning in with a serious face. But if you make friends and show people you get along warmly, won't your reputation naturally recover? And if you show that you associate freely with even a low-ranking noble like me, other people will feel more comfortable approaching you. She murmured, listening intently. You soften your impressions so other people can approach you more easily, I explained, subtly checking her expression. She still looked proud, her chin held high, but it was incredibly obvious she was starting to be swayed by my logic. Good, I thought, my confidence surging. I tossed out the real bait. And well, it's awkward to say this, but you dislike Serafina, don't you? At that precise moment, the dam broke. Of course! Evangeline cried out in a raised, greatly excited voice, abandoning all pretense of aristocratic indifference. Lady Lopez is completely obnoxious. Truly, every word is right. I cheered inwardly, almost springing up from my seat to applaud her sheer accuracy. She really needs to stop using people so slyly. Evangeline continued, fuming, her sapphire eyes blazing with indignant fire. Every time she acts like she's kind and fragile and steps back, and then she just shoves off onto other people the exact things she doesn't want to do, doesn't she? Wow, I didn't expect her to have Serafina pegged this accurately. I was completely astounded. I immediately expressed my fervent agreement. Exactly, I feel the exact same way. Right, Lady Ansi thinks so too, right? Evangeline asked, thrilled to finally have an ally, but then a shadow of suspicion crossed her beautiful face. She pulled back, asking in a prim, interrogating voice, "Then why have you been so close with Lady Lopez until now?" In an instant, I was rendered utterly speechless. I couldn't very well explain that this entire world was a book I had read, and that I was originally programmed as a brainwashed character who played Serafina's maid, could I? While I struggled to find an excuse, Evangeline narrowed her eyes, driving the point home. "To be honest, I used to think your eyes were glued to the soles of your feet until now, Lady Ansi." Ouch, young lady. You're breaking my bones. I winced inwardly. At the young lady's caustic words, my mind practically went blank. Anyway, I blurted out, desperately changing the subject. "From your perspective, too, it wouldn't be so bad to become friends with me." "Why?" she asked skeptically. "Because I'm Serafina's closest friend, aren't I?" I said, shrugging conspicuously to highlight my strategic value. "From now on, I'm planning to keep my strict distance from Serafina. If so, people will naturally wonder why our long-standing relationship has soured." I leaned across the table, lowering my voice secretly as I threw the ultimate, tantalizing question back at her. "Wouldn't they also deeply wonder why I turned away from the beloved Serafina and came to you instead, young lady?" Chapter 8. The glass conservatory felt less like a garden and more like a chessboard. Across from me sat Evangeline von Claudius, the most powerful piece on the board, and I was desperately trying to convince her that we were playing the same game. My proposal was not just a fleeting idea, it was a meticulously calculated two-birds-with-one-stone strategy. By forging an alliance, we could instantly turn the young lady's plummeting reputation into a positive one, while simultaneously landing a devastating psychological blow on Serafina. As I sat there, desperately working my tongue to persuade the formidable woman across from me, my brain was spinning at maximum capacity. I mentally reviewed the timeline of the original story. The one crucial advantage I possessed right now was that I hadn't yet done anything to land myself on the young lady's bad side. In the timeline of the novel, this was still the calm before the storm, a period where Serafina and the Duke of Claudius, along with his sister, had barely made any significant contact. Today was, in fact, the very first time I had ever met Evangeline face-to-face. If my life had continued blindly following the original plot, I would have eventually crossed paths with Evangeline while clumsily and pathetically trying to take Serafina's side. I let out a deep, shuddering sigh inwardly, imagining that alternate reality. Yes, I would have defended Serafina to the bitter end, to the point where I'd get slapped, publicly insulted, and splashed with freezing water. Shaking off the phantom chill of that miserable fate, I leaned forward, resting my hands on the wrought iron table. Just having people in high society make this and that speculation, adding their own whispered comments, would be a massive blow to Serafina, I explained, my voice steady and conspiratorial. Because Serafina's entire existence relies on her image of being universally kind and beloved. Evangeline remained silent, but her sapphire eyes were locked onto mine, practically demanding I say more. I gladly met that expectation, leaning into the role of the strategic confidante. "And if I, her supposed shadow, become your friend instead, Serafina's insides will definitely turn upside down," I said, a genuine smirk tugging at my lips. "Doesn't the thought of that alone feel a bit refreshing?" Evangeline tapped a manicured fingernail against the porcelain saucer. And then, if we gradually bring her down like that, applying pressure to her perfect little world, one day even Serafina will slip up. I promised. I couldn't help it. I smiled wickedly, feeling like a little devil perched on the Villainess's shoulder as I drove the final point home. The moment Serafina's pure mask falls away and her bare, ugly face is revealed to the world. Don't you want to see it? In that exact instant, a dangerous, thrilling light flashed within the young lady's blue eyes. The silence stretched for a moment longer. Then, with a prim, composed face, Evangeline gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Well," she murmured, her tone haughty but yielding, "it isn't a point without reason." She straightened her back, suddenly facing me directly, stripping away a layer of her usual aristocratic aloofness. "First of all, it is true that I desperately need to restore my reputation." As she spoke the words, a sudden, fierce strength went into her delicate hand. She gripped her teacup so tightly that I feared the fine china would shatter. The veins stood out, stark and blue against her snow-white skin. Scary, I thought, swallowing hard. Why on earth did such a ridiculous rumor suddenly spread? She continued, her voice dropping to a low, furious hiss through clenched teeth. My brother was quite angry. Since there's the ducal house's dignity to uphold, he strictly told me to quickly quell this rumor. Having confessed this, the imposing aura around her seemed to deflate. Evangeline let both of her shoulders sag, breathing out a long, heavy sigh that sounded far too weary for someone her age. "Well," she muttered, looking down at the table, "it isn't a rumor without any basis at all." I blinked, completely caught off guard. "I know my temperament is somewhat sharp," she admitted, her voice uncharacteristically small. "I do have sensitive parts, and it's true I'm prickly." I stared at her in utter bewilderment. What on earth? Just a few minutes ago, she had practically bitten my head off for being self-deprecating, telling me it was irritating. But now she was doing the exact same thing to herself. Staring at her unexpectedly sulky, vulnerable face, my mouth moved before my brain could catch up. "No," I retorted suddenly. "I actually like that you're refreshingly straightforward." Evangeline froze. She looked as if she had been caught completely off guard, blinking her long, golden lashes rapidly as she stared at me. What did you just say?" She stammered, her usual eloquence vanishing. "I said I like it because you're refreshingly straightforward," I repeated, my tone firm and sincere. "Me?" she asked, her eyes widening. "Of course," I replied. At my unwavering answer, Evangeline bit her lower lip, a flicker of uncertainty passing over her features. "But everyone tries to keep their distance from me," she whispered, the loneliness bleeding through her aristocratic armor. "No matter what I say, they flinch in surprise." "That's just because people misunderstand you a bit," I said, offering a light, reassuring shrug. I knew the truth, of course. I knew that Serafina had subtly, masterfully guided the narrative, whispering sweet poisons into people's ears to make them shy away from the young lady. Of course, Evangeline did have a tiny, rough edge to her personality, but from what I had experienced today, it was absolutely not to the point of being criticized as a monster. Evangeline simply moved her lips silently for a while, processing my words. Then she asked carefully, as if stepping onto thin ice, "Do you really think so, that I don't have some huge problem with my personality?" "Of course," I nodded vigorously, pouring absolute conviction into my voice. "In fact, I want to be like you. You're really wonderful." A brilliant, flushed red bloomed across Evangeline's pale cheeks. She looked entirely flustered, her pristine composure thoroughly dismantled by a few genuine compliments. But the vulnerability lasted only for a moment. As if realizing she had let her guard down too far, the corners of her eyes suddenly flared with defensive fire. "Then I guess my brother really is petty after all," she declared, her tone abruptly shifting. "All of a sudden, we're talking about the Duke of Claudius?" I thought, experiencing a mild case of emotional whiplash. At the same time, Evangeline slammed both of her hands flat onto the tea table, making a loud bang. That rattled the fine china. "Can you believe it?" she demanded, her voice rising in indignation. "Just because a rumor spread a little, he threatened to cut my allowance for maintaining appearances. Isn't that too petty?" My eyes widened in a mix of shock and morbid fascination. "Oh, the allowance for maintaining appearances," I realized, my mind racing. This part is exactly the same as the original novel. Honestly, in the current high society circles, only the vague rumor that the young lady was arrogant was circulating. The private, internal family drama about the Duke threatening to cut her allowance wasn't public knowledge at all. But the plot details matched completely, didn't they? It was a terrifying and thrilling revelation. It meant that even if the characters' actual personalities differed slightly from my perspective, the overarching direction and content of major events might still flow similarly to the book. I concluded silently, the information from the original story might be quite helpful to me going forward. Meanwhile, Evangeline continued fuming about her brother's sheer audacity for a long time. It was only after she had absent-mindedly chugged down a cup of half-cooled tea that she finally managed to calm down a little. Once her anger had subsided, her sharp, calculating intellect returned. "Anyway," she said, leaning back leisurely in her wrought iron chair, adopting a pose of absolute authority. "As Lady Ansi said yourself, you are Lady Lopez's closest friend." She stared at me, her gaze piercing. How am I supposed to trust Lady Ansi? Those sapphire-like blue eyes narrowed, brimming with dark suspicion. "For all I know, you might have approached me today on Lady Lopez's direct orders." An intense, suffocating pressure descended upon the table. If I were the old Larret, the timid, broken girl who lived to serve, I would have been completely unable to withstand that overwhelming aura. I would have stuttered, panicked, and been entirely swept up in the young lady's dominant pace. But I was not that girl anymore. "It's okay," I told myself, forcing my racing heart to calm down. I had not been idle while waiting for her reply. For nearly a full day, I had paced my bedroom, simulating all kinds of hostile interrogations and situations in my head, which meant I had already expected to be hit with this exact, piercing question. "Of course," I replied, my voice steady and unbothered. "It's only natural that you don't trust me right away." I took a short, deep breath to center myself, then smiled brightly at her. "Then how about this? We set a specific period of time to be friends temporarily." "Temporary friends," Evangeline repeated. Over her eyes, which had just been full of suspicion, a new, entirely different emotion settled. That emotion's name was raw curiosity. "If it's temporary friends, what exactly does that mean?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. "Even when a luxury shop hires a new employee, they have a probation period, don't they?" I reasoned smoothly. "I'm saying we establish a period exactly like that." Evangeline hummed softly. She still tried to act indifferent, keeping her chin raised, but I could tell. She was clearly fascinated by my unorthodox suggestion. How could I be so sure of her hidden emotions? How many miserable years do you think I had spent silently watching and analyzing Serafina and Gregory's every shifting mood? Of course I was hypersensitive to people's underlying emotions. This is hardly a positive use of the skills I gained from being a shoe wiper. I sighed inwardly, a bitter taste in my mouth, before proposing the next step. "We spend time together as temporary friends, and if you are satisfied with the results of my loyalty and companionship, how about we proceed toward writing an official friendship contract?" Honestly, analyzing it from Evangeline's lofty standpoint, it would be deeply uncomfortable and foolish to blindly trust someone named Larret Ansi right off the bat. For someone who had publicly and openly volunteered to be Serafina's lowly maid for years, to suddenly show up and say, "Let's be best friends." Of course she would have to be heavily suspicious, I rationalized. But it would also be a massive shame for her to reject my strategic proposal entirely. My established position as Serafina's closest friend was, in a very real way, a double-edged sword. If I really showed a public front, as if I had completely cut Serafina off and chosen the young lady instead, it would deal an equivalent, devastating blow to Serafina's social standing. So, we give a grace period called temporary friends, and ultimately give the young lady the power of choice. Setting up a clear safety device like a probation period would make Evangeline feel much more at ease, allowing her to retain control. I won't deny that I took heavy inspiration from the classic romance fantasy novel cliché of contract dating. But well, who says only romantic dating has to involve a contract? In these modern times, even friends, contract friends, could be the new trend. And looking at the intrigued glint in Evangeline's sapphire eyes, I knew my calculation had hit the mark perfectly. Chapter 9. The glass conservatory felt like a suspended bubble in time, the tension thick enough to cut with a silver pastry knife. Evangeline's face, usually a mask of impenetrable aristocratic pride, softened just a fraction as she digested my proposal. A friendship contract, she mused, her voice low and contemplative. So when we become friends, we set each other's duties and rights in a contract. Not bad. I thought up a plan that would satisfy both you and me as much as possible, I replied, keeping my voice steady. She snorted, a delicate but distinctly amused sound. You're quite confident. Isn't it still unknown whether I'll take Lady Ancy as my friend or not? Well, because I'm confident I can be loyal to you, I said, flashing my brightest, most genuine smile. If you lose me, it's as good as losing the person who will someday become the most loyal friend to you. Silence fell over the wrought iron table. Those vivid blue eyes locked onto mine, deep and unfathomable like a serene lake. I couldn't read her true thoughts, so I had to push forward with everything I had. So if you end up pushing me away, wouldn't that be a loss for you as well? I pressed. My mouth was bone dry with tension, but I desperately tried to maintain a relaxed posture. Of course, it would be a big loss for me too, since I wouldn't get to be friends with someone wonderful like you. It would be a big loss for me as well, I hurriedly added, layering on a final bit of strategic flattery. She stared at me for a long time. For once, you're not being frustrating, she finally declared. Just earlier, you were suddenly self-deprecating. You were making the viewer irritated. Her pinpoint accuracy was violent, stripping away all my carefully constructed defenses. No sense of your own, trailing after only Lady Lopez, and Lady Lopez took your attendance as if it were natural, didn't she? She scoffed. How is that friendship? Even a maid wouldn't be worked like that. I felt a bitter sting in my chest because she was absolutely right. If I hadn't suddenly remembered the original plot of this world, I would probably still be living that miserable existence. Then Evangeline gave a decisive nod. Anyway, fine. She crossed her arms, looking delightfully sulky. I said yes. My eyes sparkled. Thank you so much, I'll do my best. I'll work as hard as I can so I don't disappoint you. Enough with the empty words, she huffed, turning her head away, though her cheeks were already flushed a brilliant red. She stole a sideways glance at me. So, we did become friends, didn't we? Of course, not real friends, just temporary, but... After emphasizing our temporary status several times, she asked in a prim, hesitant voice, what are we supposed to do from now on? I froze in shock. What is this person? She was like an incredibly pretty, high-end Persian cat, proud, prickly, and entirely clueless about how to actually play. What is it? Why aren't you saying anything? She pouted, glaring at me when I fell into my brief daydream. You said you'd be friends with me, even if it's temporary. Do you hate the idea of spending time with me or something? Of course not, I quickly replied. Then shall we start by getting to know each other? What does that mean? She asked. We only said we'd be temporary friends, but we don't know anything about each other, do we? I explained gently. I smiled warmly at her. Hobbies, favorite foods, anything is fine. Could you tell me a little more about yourself, young lady? Outside the estate, a carriage bearing the crest of the Sword and Rose glided to a halt before the ducal townhouse. The door clicked open, and a breathtakingly handsome man stepped down onto the cobblestones. Welcome back, my lord. The butler greeted him respectfully. With pale platinum hair and icy blue eyes, Dietrich von Claudius, the head of the house and the empire's sharpest sword, nodded. I'm surprised you returned early, the butler noted. Sometimes there should be days like this, Dietrich replied smoothly. The state council meeting ended early too. As he crossed the manicured garden, Dietrich suddenly stopped in his tracks. Ahahaha, is that really so? A clear, ringing laugh drifted from beyond the rose bushes. Dietrich's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Eva! Beneath the shade of the blooming roses, his little sister was bursting into genuine giggles. Opposite her sat a lady with long black hair, hanging down. Dietrich observed them from a distance. Eva, socializing with another lady, how unusual. He knew his sister's prickly nature made it hard for her to mingle, a problem compounded by her lofty birth which prevented others from speaking frankly to her. Because of this isolation, rumors of her arrogance had recently spread through high society. Who on earth is that lady? Dietrich asked the butler. She is a lady of House Ancy. Her name is Larret Ancy. The butler replied. Lady Ancy. Impressive indeed. Dietrich murmured, watching the woman who had managed to make his difficult sister laugh like that. He rolled the name around in his mouth. Larret Ancy. It brought him a rare, pleasant feeling. As the sun began to sink low, casting long golden shadows across the estate, Evangeline and I stood at the townhouse entrance exchanging our farewells. "It's late, would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked, her expression tinged with regret. My brother happened to return early too. I quickly shook my head, adjusting the massive bouquet of roses held in my arms. "It's all right, thank you for even saying so." The idea of having dinner with the terrifying Duke of Claudius on top of everything else would surely give me terrible indigestion. "Thank you so much for these roses too. I'll cherish them," I added sincerely. I had learned today that Evangeline's hobbies were flower arranging and gardening. When I casually mentioned how beautifully the roses had bloomed, she had immediately gathered an armful of the highest grade roses for me to take home. "Anyway, Lady Ancy," Evangeline suddenly said, looking me up and down with a deeply sulky gaze that felt like a bolt from the blue. "At this rate, you fail as a temporary friend." Chapter 10. What? I was absolutely aghast. My eyes widened so far they practically vibrated in their sockets. Am I getting scolded already? My mind raced, frantically trying to piece together where I had gone wrong. And no, but the mood today was pretty good, wasn't it? The young lady even laughed several times. Right then, Evangeline shattered my confusion with a declaration as cold and sharp as a winter blade. "With such a tacky getup, I can't even take you as a temporary friend. This is a matter of my pride," she stated haughtily, her sapphire eyes raking over my outfit with undisguised disdain. "Ah," I sighed inwardly, a heavy weight settling in my chest. Of course, it was only natural that my drab outfit wouldn't satisfy the young lady's lofty, aristocratic aesthetic. Up to now, to ensure Serafina always stood out as the radiant heroine, I had exclusively worn dreary, mud-colored dresses. Even if I shook my entire wardrobe upside down, a beautiful, vibrant dress wouldn't just magically pop into existence. Still, I felt the need to defend myself. This time, when I came to see you, I did dress in the most decent thing I could." I protested timidly. "Decent?" At my weak defense, the young lady's eyes blazed with magnificent fury. "That dreary gray dress is decent. Even my late grandmother wouldn't have worn a dress like that." I was entirely unable to withstand the sheer force of her aristocratic wrath. I meekly shrank down into my chair, making myself as small as possible. But Evangeline's anger wasn't quite finished. "And that hair, too," she snapped, gesturing wildly at my head. "My hair, why? You didn't even take care of it, you just let it hang down everywhere like a ghost," she scolded. "Of course not. You were born with such thick, beautiful hair. Isn't it a massive waist?" Her blue eyes flashed, brimming with a fierce, almost protective madness. "Seriously, does Lady Lopez think it's enough if only she goes around dressed up prettily? That's why people mock Lady Ancy even more. What kind of friend is that?" The young lady was practically stomping her feet now, spitting righteous fire on my behalf. "Lady Lopez, it's blatantly obvious. She deliberately drags you around like a mere extra, just so she can stand out more. It makes my skin crawl, truly." I sat frozen, utterly stunned. What? She's really seen right through Serafina's true intentions that accurately. A spark of genuine admiration flared in my heart. After ranting for a good while, Evangeline finally calmed down. She pressed a delicate hand to her forehead and shook her head with a heavy, dramatic sigh. What's the use of having good raw material? You're not using it at all." In that instant, my eyes widened. "Emmy, really?" When I reflexively asked back, so conditioned to doubt myself, the young lady narrowed her eyes and shot me a sharp, penetrating look. "What? That you just said my raw material is good." I trailed off awkwardly, shrinking under her gaze. Evangeline didn't even try to hide her incredulous expression. "What, are you going to self-deprecate again?" And no, not to that extent, but for years, Serafina and Gregory had drilled their toxic words into my skull. "Where would you find a lady as ugly as you? How dare you put on flashy jewels, know your place?" After realizing the truth of the original novel, I knew their words were full of hypocrisy and malice. But the deep scars they left behind weren't easily erased. "Seriously, do I have to say even this out loud for you to understand?" Evangeline asked, her tone softening just a fraction as she began folding down her manicured fingers one by one. "Lady Ancy has a clear skin tone, a slender figure, and your features have no harshness. In particular, your posture being so straight and elegant is a massive strength. You look properly educated." Then she frowned and snapped at me, a teacher scolding a slow student. "You should at least have a firm grasp of your own strengths. That way you can enhance those strengths, don't you think?" I see." I nodded blankly. How could I describe it? Hearing someone confidently say, "Actually, you have these strengths," felt entirely foreign. Deep in my chest, a warm, ticklish sensation bloomed, like being wrapped in a soft, downy blanket. But Evangeline didn't let me soak in the sentimentality for long. She planted both hands firmly on her hips. "Anyway, we've gotten off track. If you're going to be even a temporary friend with me, then not only your clothes and hairstyle, but even that habitual self-deprecation. You have to fix every last bit of it. I will take it to heart." I reflexively straightened my posture, sitting at attention. "Tomorrow morning at 10, she declared decisively. "Yes, I'll come to pick you up at your townhouse, so wait." I blinked, thoroughly lost. "Yes." When I kept repeating my confused questions, the young lady clicked her tongue loudly. "Why, you said friends go shopping together and eat tasty things together, too." "WL. It's true, I did say that. But this suddenly. If you stand me up, I won't let you off, understood?" Only after emphasizing her threat again and again did the young lady finally let me go. As my carriage rolled slowly away from the sprawling ducal estate, I lowered my gaze. Resting on my knees was a massive bouquet of the highest-grade roses gifted to me by Evangeline herself. A rich, sweet fragrance rose from the velvet petals. Carefully, I lifted the bouquet and buried my nose in it. "Smells nice," I whispered. Somehow, I thought these roses perfectly resembled the young lady. Even though they wore sharp, defensive thorns all over their stems, they possessed a sweet fragrance and soft petals that made those thorns entirely irrelevant. She was a lovely, prickly rose that anyone couldn't help but love. Meanwhile, from behind a large window in the Claudius estate, Dietrich watched his sister scurry back into the townhouse. Her steps were lighter than he had seen in years. "Eva," Dietrich called out, his voice smooth and teasing. "Ah, brother," Evangeline blinked, looking up at him. "To see you mingling with a lady your own age, of all things, did you finally make a friend?" he asked, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "It's not a friend." Evangeline cried out instantly, her fur bristling like a startled cat. "It's only a temporary friend. You don't even know anything, brother." Dietrich chuckled softly. "If she's a friend, she's a friend. What on earth is a temporary friend? More importantly," he continued, "earlier, you looked pretty happy. Your laughter was booming through the garden." I just laughed a little. It's not like I laughed that much." She stammered, her cheeks flushing a brilliant crimson. "Is that so?" Dietrich asked, genuinely curious. "I heard Lady Ansi is close with Lady Lopez. But you dislike Lady Lopez, don't you?" "Well, that's true, but—" Evangeline pouted, turning her head away to hide her smile. "Well, she doesn't seem as hopelessly stiff as I thought. Today we talked about my hobbies and, well, it was fairly fun. Lady Ansi is the type who listens well to what other people say. It was easy to talk." Dietrich was amazed. To hear a favorable review like fairly fun from the notoriously prickly Evangeline. That meant her satisfaction level was at its absolute maximum. "So she is a friend after all," Dietrich concluded. "She's not a friend. I said she's a temporary friend." Evangeline shrieked, shooting him a murderous glare. But almost immediately, she shifted gears, her eyes gleaming with calculation. "More importantly, brother, about my allowance for maintaining appearances," she began, a sly smile forming. "I promised to go out and have fun with Lady Ansi tomorrow. I may look like this, but I'm the Empire's only young lady of a ducal house. I can't make Lady Ansi pay the bill, right?" Dietrich laughed, shaking his head at his sister's transparent tactics. "Ah, so you want the cut to your allowance undone? That depends on what you do." Evangeline's face crumpled instantly. "Ah, seriously." Chapter 11, Dietrich let out a soft, rich chuckle that echoed gently through the grand halls of the townhouse. He simply couldn't hold it in at the sight of his little sister, Evangeline, bristling like a defensive, high-strung cat whose tail had just been stepped on. "Fine, let's call it that," he conceded, his voice laced with unmistakable amusement as he roughly, yet affectionately, soothed his agitated sister. "Ah, it's true. She really is a temporary friend." Evangeline cried out, her cheeks flushing a brilliant, defensive crimson. "I'm the young lady of Claudius. Do you think I make friends that easily?" I said I got it. Dietrich replied, though the warm, teasing smile never left his perfectly sculpted face. Internally, Dietrich felt a profound sense of relief. It had been a very long time since he had seen Evangeline truly enjoy herself like that. By her very nature, his sister had a sharp, uncompromising sense of likes and dislikes. If she truly despised someone, she wouldn't have even bothered to speak to them. She had spent the entire day with Larret Ansi, and even though she was currently grumbling and denying it with her mouth, her vibrant energy was absolute proof that she had taken a strong liking to the lady. More importantly, brother, about my allowance for maintaining appearances, Evangeline suddenly announced, her prim voice pulling Dietrich from his fond musings. Don't tell me you're really going to touch my allowance. She shot him a sideways, calculating look, her lips pinched together. I promised to go out and have fun with Lady Ansi tomorrow, she declared. I may look like this, but I'm the Empire's only young lady of a ducal house. I can't make Lady Ansi pay the bill. Right? Ah, so you want the cut to your allowance for maintaining appearances to be undone? Dietrich asked, shrugging lightly as he replied in a teasing tone. That depends on what you do. Evangeline's face instantly crumpled into an expression of sheer outrage. Ah, seriously? I stepped into the grand foyer of Viscount Ansi's townhouse, my arms wrapped tightly around a massive bouquet of the highest-grade roses. The sweet, velvety fragrance clung to my hair and clothes, a lingering reminder of the surreal afternoon I had just experienced. You're back, miss. Amy, my faithful maid, hurried over to welcome me. As her eyes fell upon the extravagant blooms, they widened to the size of saucers. My goodness, what a bouquet of roses is this? They're so pretty. I got them as a gift. Could you put them in a vase? I asked, handing them over carefully. As Amy delicately accepted the bouquet, her expression shifted into a deeply troubled frown. Ah, right, miss. A letter came from young Master Gusto a little while ago. No, why is he acting like this again all of a sudden? My face crumpled at once. The euphoric mood that had made me feel as if I were walking on clouds plunged straight down into the abyss. Just burn it, I ordered with a dismissive shake of my head. What good would it do to read it? It would only harm my eyesight. Amy nodded, turning to leave. Then I'll take it that we'll burn all the letters. Wait. I paused, looking back at her with a deeply puzzled expression. Letters, it wasn't just one. What? Of course not, Amy replied, looking utterly sick of the entire situation. There are 15 in total. What? I gasped, utterly horrified. 15, my brain scrambled to do the math. I had visited the ducal townhouse a little after lunchtime and returned home just in time for the evening. That meant I had been away for, at most, 4 or 5 hours. Does that mean he sent almost 3 letters an hour? I thought, a shudder running down my spine. What is wrong with him? He's acting like an obsessed stalker, and it is honestly disgusting. And the servant from Count Gusto's house insisted that you absolutely must send a reply, Amy added with a heavy sigh. As you said, shall I burn all the letters? I knit my brow deeply, contemplating the pile of paper. No, I finally decided, stopping her. If he had sent 15 letters in such a manic frenzy, there might actually be some important family business hidden within the madness. Though I was certain my annulment documents were legally flawless and Count Gusto's house wouldn't be able to picket them, I had to be sure. I'll check them first, I sighed. Understood. The letters are on your dressing table in your bedroom, Amy said. Trudging up to my room, I found the silver tray atop my dressing table practically overflowing with envelopes. Swallowing hard, I picked up the first letter, broke the seal, and unfolded it. A mere moment later, I let out a disgusted groan. Ugh! With a grimace, I violently crumpled the parchment into a tight ball and hurled it into the wastebasket. The contents were pure, unfiltered garbage. What on earth are you thinking, Larret? Get a grip. If not me, who would ever marry a woman like you? Stop this here and apologize properly to me and Sira. Then I'll forgive you. My parents also said that if you just apologize, the annulment will be as if it never happened. There was absolutely no need to read the other 14. They were undoubtedly filled with the same arrogant, delusional nonsense. How could he be so pathetically clinging to me when he was the one who had screamed about reconsidering our engagement and calling me unrefined? Phew, I worried for nothing. I muttered, letting out a long, exhausted sigh as I headed for the bathroom to wash up and go to bed early. I had to meet the young lady tomorrow, and I needed my strength. The next morning, the clock hands had barely struck 9 when Evangeline practically charged into the antsy townhouse. "Welcome, young lady." I greeted her politely, feeling significantly less nervous than I had the day before. Ugh, a dreary dress again. Evangeline instantly complained, her nose wrinkling the moment her eyes fell upon my outfit. She gestured sharply toward her waiting carriage with her chin. "Anyway, it's good to see you. Then shall we go out first?" "Huh." I narrowed my eyes, studying her carefully. Even though she had applied her makeup with divine perfection, I could detect a faint, undeniable shadow beneath her beautiful sapphire eyes. "Did you perhaps not sleep properly last night?" I asked without thinking. "Me." Evangeline sprang up in place like a startled cat. "How could that be? That's Lady Ancy's misunderstanding." "Ah, I see." I nodded gently, deciding to let it go. Maybe I was a bit too sensitive, but Evangeline couldn't leave well enough alone. As if I would lose sleep because I couldn't stop looking forward to going out with Lady Ancy. She cried out, clenching both her fists, defensively. I stared at her steadily, desperately biting the inside of my cheek to suppress the laughter threatening to burst from my lips. I forced a gentle, oblivious smile, realizing that saving my new friend from piling up a history of embarrassing moments was my duty. Then shall we depart for now?" I suggested smoothly. Evangeline, looking utterly miserable that her tsundere act had slipped, trotted after me toward the carriage. "It's true. I slept well last night," she insisted. Yes, I agreed. "I said I didn't lose sleep," she yelled. The luxurious carriage bearing the emblem of the sword and rose glided smoothly into Elmore Street, the most exclusive district in the capital where all the highest-end shops gathered. "Dresses, we have to buy Lady Ancy's dresses. Shoes, hats, and bags too," Evangeline declared, her eyes shining with terrifying determination. How much of my allowance do I even have left?" I panicked internally, desperately calculating the meager funds I possessed. Because Serafina had constantly whined for new dresses and accessories, my official capacity as her walking wallet had drained my accounts dry. "What are you doing?" "Not coming in," Evangeline snapped, glancing at me sidelong as she strode gracefully toward the boutique entrance. Like a tragic ox being led to the slaughterhouse, I dragged my heavy feet and followed her. But as we stepped inside, my face drained of all color. I froze stiffly. "Young lady," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What?" "Somehow it looks like there aren't any customers in the shop at all," I pointed out, staring at the vast, eerily empty showroom of the luxury boutique. Evangeline barely spared the empty room a glance, offering a light, unbothered shrug. "I rented it out for the whole day. Is there a problem?" I stared at her, completely and utterly horrified. Chapter 12. No matter what I had braced myself for, I never would have imagined that the young lady would rent out an entire boutique just for us. And to make matters even more overwhelming, this wasn't just any ordinary shop. It was the Christensen boutique. This was the absolute pinnacle of high-end fashion in the capital, run under the prestigious name of Madame Christensen herself, one of the top dress designers in the entire empire. It was a legendary establishment where the leading nobles, and occasionally even the imperial family, commissioned their garments. Recently, the boutique's fame had skyrocketed even higher after they took charge of designing a wedding dress for a foreign crown princess. To put it simply, it was a place so exclusive and astronomically expensive that even Serafina, who always got everything she wanted, had never once managed to have a dress made here. My pupils shook violently, practically vibrating with sheer panic. The price? Can I afford it? Right now, my allowance for maintaining appearances was scraping the absolute bottom of the barrel. Just recently, Serafina had blinked her pretty eyes at me and whined, "Larry, I want a new dress." And because of that, acting as her official walking wallet, I had naturally bought her whatever she asked for, draining my accounts dry. "What are you doing?" "Not coming in," Evangeline snapped, glancing at me sidelong as she strode gracefully into the opulent showroom. Sob. Like a tragic ox being led by the nose to the slaughterhouse, I dragged my incredibly heavy feet and followed the young lady inside. Seriously, I desperately wished they offered installment payments here. About 2 hours of intense measuring, fitting, and styling later. Now it finally feels like it's worth walking around together," Evangeline murmured in a deeply satisfied voice, studying my reflection closely in the full-length mirror. "That's right, she's a lady worth dressing up. Madame Christensen quickly chimed in, her expert eyes gleaming with professional pride. It was exactly as they said. From head to toe, freshly cleaned, polished, and styled, I looked completely different. It's better than I thought. My raven black hair, which had always been left to trail down everywhere like a gloomy ghost, was now neatly and elegantly styled half up. The dress they had chosen was a soft, breathtaking pink that perfectly suited the color of my eyes, lightly cinched at the waist to emphasize my slender figure. And as the ultimate finishing touch, there was a luxurious handbag adorned with a delicate ribbon. Even to my own eyes, whose standards for beauty had been endlessly raised by constantly being surrounded by Serafina and the young lady, I looked quite pretty. But there was still the biggest, most terrifying problem left to face. The bill. What do I do? Squeezing my eyes shut in dread, I turned creakily like a rusted machine toward the boutique owner. Madam Christensen, do you perhaps offer installment payments? Wait a moment. What are you talking about? At the exact same time, Evangeline cut in, her blue eyes flashing with a murderous glare. Don't tell me you thought you'd make Lady Ancy pay for the dress, she demanded indignantly. Then she lifted her chin haughtily, radiating absolute aristocratic pride. I'm the young lady of Claudius. I'm not so hard up that I'd push off a paltry sum like this. Oh no. Gazing at the young lady with rapturous, starstruck eyes, the words blurted out of my mouth before my brain could stop them. I think I'm falling for you. HMPH, just because of this much. Evangeline snorted so I could clearly hear her feigned indifference, though the tips of her ears were turning pink. She then flicked her gaze toward the designer. Bill everything we spent today to the ducal house. Yes, young lady, Madame Christensen bowed respectfully. Turning back to me, Evangeline primly suggested, shall we go eat lunch now? We moved to a famous, high-end brunch shop to have an early meal. The young lady's meticulous preparedness shone brightly here as well. Without a moment's delay, we were guided straight to an exclusive second-floor balcony seat that offered a clear, beautiful view of the bustling street below. Don't tell me you reserved in advance, I asked, genuinely impressed. Of course. Popular restaurants are hard to get into if you don't reserve in advance, she replied matter-of-factly. Since yesterday, I had been thinking it, but unexpectedly, the young lady was an incredibly sensible person. In truth, with the immense power of a great high noble house like the Claudius family, she could have easily forced the restaurant to produce a seat out of thin air. But it was as if she completely refused to abuse her privileges. For someone like that to be the villainess of the original story. Once again, I lamented the sheer unfairness of this novel's world. Order anything you want. I'll go to the washroom for a moment, Evangeline said, rising from her chair. Ah, yes, I nodded. After the young lady left the table, I looked over the menu for a moment before lifting my gaze to look beyond the balcony. The people passing through the sunlit street all looked so carefree and happy. And I, too. Right now. I probably look similar to them, don't I? How could I put it? This truly felt like a dream. I had always thought that receiving people's genuine kindness and enjoying the finer things in life was a privilege permitted only to Serafina. But now, as the gentle breeze brushed my face, it felt like I, too, was the protagonist of my own life. Larry. This voice is. Turning around, I reflexively scrunched up my face in a frown. Standing there, staring at me with their eyes wide in utter disbelief, were Serafina and Gregory. What is this? It's not like enemies only meet on a narrow bridge. Why is it those two again? I sincerely wanted to stop seeing their faces already. Meanwhile, Serafina, who had been staring at me as if she had just seen a ghost, hurriedly regained her senses and forced a greeting. Fancy seeing you here, Larry. What brings you to such a high-end brunch shop? Seeing how she put subtle, malicious strength into the word high-end, it was obvious she wanted to sneer. What on earth are you doing in a fancy place like this without me? There's only one reason to come to a place that sells brunch, isn't there? I gave a light, entirely unbothered shrug. I came to eat. At my nonchalant, completely unimpressed answer, Serafina bit her lip hard in sheer frustration. Of course she would. Usually, when Serafina made it obvious she was in a bad mood like that, I would panic and grovel on my own to soothe her. She must be wondering why I was being so unusually stiff and defiant. Looks like you two came out shopping, I asked smoothly. The moment the question left my lips, Serafina proudly held out the paper shopping bags she was carrying in both hands. Yeah, Gregor said he'd buy me a new hat, she bragged. I'm even getting gifts from your fiancé, while you can't get anything, right? That was roughly the petty meaning behind her words. I deliberately morphed my expression into one of deep, condescending pity. My goodness, you carried all of that around yourself. That must be heavy. I did a bit of shopping today too, but they said they'd deliver all my purchases directly to the townhouse. What? Serafina narrowed her eyes, looking at me with a deeply suspicious gaze. Most luxury brands in the capital did offer a delivery service. However, everyone knew that delivery service was strictly limited only to VIPs who produced overwhelming sales for the brand. Serafina, who was well-versed in the hierarchy of luxury brands, would more than understand exactly what my words implied. Wait. At the same time, Serafina's gaze snapped down, focusing entirely on the handbag resting on my lap. Raw, unfiltered shock filled her deep green eyes. That handbag? Don't tell me it's Madame Christensen's. As expected, she recognizes it right away. The delicate ribbon ornament was the undisputed signature of Madame Christensen's exclusive designs. I smiled, feeling deeply satisfied inwardly. Serafina, her eyes practically rolling back with overwhelming jealousy, sharply pressed me again. How are you carrying a bag from Madame Christensen? They're extremely picky about which customers they take. Oh, Serafina. Tilting my head, I faced her with a perfectly serene smile. Are you saying I'm not of the caliber to carry a bag from Madame Christensen? Serafina ground her teeth silently. Well, she must be annoyed enough to go completely crazy. Madame Christensen's exquisite dresses and bags were treasures that Serafina herself had never managed to obtain even once until now. And now, not only had I suddenly dressed myself from head to toe in that exact brand, but I was also effortlessly turning her insides upside down with every word. But since Serafina's carefully crafted public image was kind and innocent, it would be extremely hard for her to lash out and reveal her true, ugly self in a crowded restaurant. Isn't that right? While I gave Serafina a curving, smiling eye, I glanced sidelong at Gregory. That aside, Gregory is strangely quiet. I had fully expected him to step up and spout his usual nonsense, saying I was being extravagant, or that such luxury goods didn't suit my gloomy face, or demanding that I should yield the bag to Serafina. But right now, Gregory wasn't shouting. He was only looking at me with an incredibly odd, intense gaze. It wasn't his usual hostile glare. Rather, if anything, it looked similar to the gaze he usually used when looking at Serafina. That is to say, it was as if he was finally looking at me as a beautiful woman. A sickening chill ran straight down my spine. Chapter 13, I had to actively fight the urge to visibly shudder. Gregory, the man who had spent years treating me like a burdensome piece of furniture, was now staring at me with the exact same flushed, affectionate gaze he usually reserved exclusively for Serafina. It wasn't flattering. It was deeply, profoundly repulsive. Sensing the shift in Gregory's attention, Serafina stiffened. "And no, that can't be," she muttered quickly, forcing a stiff, unnatural smile back onto her beautiful face. "If my friend gets good service, I'm happy too." A moment later, she cleared her throat, her eyes darting around the luxurious restaurant before settling back on me with a sickly sweet expression. "More importantly, don't tell me you came alone," she asked, her tone dripping with mock concern. "Larry, you don't really know much about places this high-end." Her deep green eyes locked onto mine, putting on a masterful, pitiful act meant for any onlookers. "If you wanted to come to a place like this, you should have told me in advance," she sighed softly. "Then I could have brought you at least once. You don't know anything. Without my help, you can't do anything." That was the clear, undeniable malice hidden quietly beneath her patronizing, saintly attitude. In the past, the old Larret used to be deeply hurt by that attitude every single time. I used to fear it, internalizing the belief that I was useless, and I would try somehow, desperately, to please Serafina to earn my place beside her. But now I was simply calm. It was almost funny how transparent her tactics were. "Well, I never said I came alone," I replied smoothly, taking a delicate sip of my water. "What?" In an instant, Gregory's eyes went wide, bulging out of his head like a startled toad. "You have company," he barked, his voice suddenly thick with accusation. What? Why is he suddenly snapping? Confused, I turned to look at Gregory, raising a single, perfectly groomed eyebrow. "What are you even talking about? A lady who even has a fiancé acting with no modesty?" He hissed, his face turning an angry shade of red. I stared at him, genuinely lost for words. Hey, it's been days since I sent the official annulment letter to your estate, and you're still going on about fiancé. Did he suffer from a severe memory deficiency? And why aren't you replying to my letters? Gregory demanded, leaning over the table, entirely ignoring the refined atmosphere of the brunch shop. I sent so many of them. Staring straight into his furious, entitled eyes, I let out a long, exhausted sigh. Oh, that? I answered, my voice deliberately loud enough to carry. It was nothing but long-winded nonsense, so it didn't seem worth replying. Larret, Gregory shouted at the top of his lungs, completely losing whatever fragile grip he had on his temper. You'll regret this, if not me, who would ever marry you? No, why do you think I'll regret it? I asked back, tilting my head innocently. As I spoke, I carefully surveyed the atmosphere around us. I could see the other patrons starting to pay close attention to our table, their forks pausing midair. And in a high-end place like this, most of the customers were ladies and gentlemen from highly influential noble families. This is actually perfect, I realized with a thrill of vindication. In front of so many eyes and listening ears, it would be infinitely better to make it undeniably clear to high society that I was the one who dumped Gregory Gusto. Having made that strategic judgment, I deliberately spoke even more clearly, projecting my voice across the balcony. If I were going to regret it, I wouldn't have sent the annulment letter in the first place, I declared crisply. What did you say? Gregory sputtered, looking around as the surrounding nobles began to whisper behind their hands. Honestly, there's no reason for me to regret it at all, I continued, twisting the knife with a pleasant smile. I'm the heir of a viscount's house with an estate to my name, but you're merely the second son of a count's house. Gregory's whole face turned a brilliant, burning red with shame and rage. Feeling thoroughly satisfied, I took a moment to admire his face, which currently resembled a well-ripened tomato. In the future, I'll be Viscount Ansi. I pointed out the brutal, undeniable truth. But aren't you just someone with no title at all? Are you done talking? Gregory slammed his hand on the table, practically vibrating with fury. I only stated the facts. Why are you so angry? I answered obnoxiously, mirroring the exact tone Serafina always used when she insulted me. As I had recently learned from the young lady, nothing in this world is more painful than calmly pointing out the absolute facts. And then, right at that very moment of total victory, what on earth is all this commotion? Click, click, along with the brisk, sharp sound of heels striking the floorboards, the young lady of Claudius approached our table. She stopped, crossed her arms, and tilted her head askew, her sapphire eyes gleaming with dangerous amusement. From what I hear, Lady Ansi has already sent an annulment letter. Evangeline drawled lazily, her voice dripping with aristocratic authority. So then, the two of you aren't even engaged anymore, are you? That is? Gregory stammered, the remaining color draining from his face, as he realized exactly who had just caught him screaming in a restaurant. Then why are you clinging to Lady Ansi like this? Evangeline asked, looking Gregory up and down with an expression usually reserved for scraping something foul off the bottom of a shoe. The young lady tossed out a single, devastating word. Pathetic. Young lady, you're amazing, I cheered inwardly, clenching my fist tight under the table. But the violence of the young lady's factual precision wasn't over yet. To me, it looks like young Master Gusto still has lingering feelings for Lady Ansi, she observed dryly, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. There's no way I would. Gregory squeaked, thoroughly humiliated. Ah, really? Good. With a dismissive snort, the young lady snapped at him like a disobedient dog. Then could you shut your mouth and move aside? I want to eat quietly. Gregory looked like a man who had just taken 3 brutal uppercuts to the jaw and was teetering on the verge of death. In other words, he had lost his mind entirely. Meanwhile, Evangeline, having effortlessly and lightly pressed Gregory down into the dirt where he belonged, turned her back on him completely. She looked at me and smiled with radiant confidence. Lady Ansi, she called out musically. Yes, young lady, I replied dutifully. Soon, you'll receive an invitation, she announced, making sure her voice carried to the frozen Serafina. An invitation. Yes, it's a salon I host regularly. In an instant, Serafina's eyes shook violently in their sockets. The Claudius Ducal Salon. Traditionally, the Duchess of the Ducal House invites and supports the most promising rising artists and writers of the empire through this incredibly exclusive salon. Right now, since the current Duke is still unmarried, it was widely known that his younger sister, Evangeline, was taking his place as the hostess. But above all else, it's the place Serafina always desperately wanted to attend and watched for, but couldn't get into. The young lady lifted her chin haughtily, her gaze briefly flicking to the seething Serafina before returning to me. "When that time comes, be sure to wear the dress I bought you today." "Understood," she ordered playfully. "Young lady, you really must hate the way I normally dress," I thought, feeling a bit awkward for a fleeting second. But that awkwardness was immediately replaced by sheer, unadulterated triumph. I smiled brightly, practically glowing. "Yes, young lady." Standing right beside our table, Serafina and Gregory's faces completely rotted away. Chapter 14. The salon held by the prestigious House Claudius was not just a simple gathering. It was a deeply rooted, long-established art event that dictated the cultural heartbeat of the empire. Though it wasn't an officially accredited competition with judges and medals, merely having a piece submitted and displayed at the ducal salon meant that the immense power of House Claudius was closely watching that artist's potential. And in reality, the Duke of Claudius did frequently select and generously sponsor the most promising artists from this very event. Aside from the artists themselves, a staggering number of high-ranking nobles attended as spectators, draped in their finest jewels. For the creators, this was a significant, life-changing advantage. After all, the more powerful nobles you made a lasting impression on, the more it would skyrocket your future artistic career. Even if you weren't lucky enough to be directly chosen for sponsorship by the ducal house itself, you could still easily find a wealthy new patron among the glittering crowd. I had heard countless times that quite a few world-famous artists were originally produced by this very salon. Sitting in my room, I tapped my chin thoughtfully. If that's the case, then by now the young lady should be so overwhelmingly busy preparing for the salon that she can't even breathe. I looked down at the letter Evangeline had sent me. Is it really okay for me to just go visit her right now? Or was this letter an unspoken pressure subtly telling me to come over and help her prepare for the massive event? Just as I was sitting there, entirely bewildered and overthinking the situation. Miss," a voice called out to me cautiously. I snapped back to my senses and turned around in my chair. What is it, Amy?" In an instant, looking at my maid's face, I felt a terrible, icy premonition run straight down my spine. This feels ominous. Amy's expression was deeply troubled, her brows knitted together in distress. I knew exactly what it meant when Amy made an expression like that. It was the exact same face she had made the other day, when Gregory and Serafina had violently barged into the townhouse without so much as a warning message. Amy opened her mouth, her voice tight. "Lady Lopez has come to see you." "Of course she has." I immediately scrunched up my face in profound annoyance. Why does she keep clinging and clinging to me? But Amy wasn't finished delivering the bad news. "But Baroness Ventnor is with her," she added nervously. "What?" I physically recoiled in my chair, because Baroness Ventnor was none other than Gregory's aunt. A short moment later, I slowly descended the grand staircase and walked into the drawing room, making absolutely no effort to hide the cold, indifferent expression on my face. "Aunt, thank you so much for coming here with me today." Serafina was cooing, speaking with sickening sweetness to the strict-looking, sharply dressed, middle-aged noblewoman seated intimately beside her on the velvet sofa. Sitting shoulder to shoulder, they looked so incredibly close that anyone walking into the room would instantly assume they were a loving mother and daughter. "If it weren't for you, Aunt, I simply wouldn't have had the courage to come here all alone," Serafina murmured, casting her eyes downward in a picture-perfect display of fragile vulnerability. "No, think nothing of it. To think that girl Larret would be so unspeakably rude to our Gregory," the middle-aged noblewoman replied, smiling generously and warmly at Serafina. "If it weren't for you telling me, we wouldn't even be able to step in and correct such appalling rudeness." Aunt," Serafina breathed, looking deeply moved. "So rather, I should be the one thanking you, my dear," the Baroness declared proudly. I stood in the doorway, my jaw clenching. Do I really have to stand here and listen to this fresh new brand of nonsense from so early in the morning? For the record, the reason Serafina called Gregory's aunt was born from a truly maddening collaboration years ago. Gregory had enthusiastically suggested, "If she's my aunt, then she's your aunt too, Sera." And Serafina had immediately clapped her hands, asking with wide, innocent eyes, "Really? Is it really okay if I call you aunt?" To which Baroness Ventnor had beamed and replied, "Do so. I'm happy to have such a pretty niece." That was how the ridiculous title was decided. And for the record, Baroness Ventnor had always tried to act exactly like my overbearing mother-in-law in every conceivable way, constantly nagging and correcting my behavior, even though Gregory and I weren't even married yet. That aside, I didn't think she'd be this transparent about her tactics, I thought, narrowing my eyes as I coldly observed Serafina. Since I had repeatedly and firmly kept refusing Serafina's visits to my home, she must have calculated that she needed to bring someone I couldn't easily refuse or kick out over to her side. Just then, Serafina abruptly turned her head this way. The very instant our eyes met across the room, Serafina gave me a subtle, chilling victor's smile. "No matter what you do, everyone else is always on my side." It was exactly as if her eyes were proudly screaming that message at me. "Larry," Serafina suddenly called out, her voice shifting instantly to sound absolutely delighted to see me. "Good morning. Aunt said it's been a long time since she saw your face, so I brought her along while I was at it. And—" "Serafina," I said, cleanly and sharply cutting her off mid-ramble. My voice was as cold as ice. "You came into my home without even giving notice in advance. How many times has it been already? Isn't that far too rude?" At my blunt, unforgiving words, Serafina widened her eyes as if she had just suffered an enormous physical shock. Then she let both of her delicate shoulders sag and lowered her long eyelashes, trembling slightly. She looked so incredibly fragile and victimized that if an outsider didn't know the context of the situation, they'd absolutely think I was a villain cruelly bullying the poor girl. "Are you snubbing Sera right now?" At the same time, Baroness Ventnor quickly jumped into the conversation like a protective guard dog. "Sera told me everything. You dared send our Gregory an annulment letter." A fierce, fiery glare flashed between the older woman's wrinkled eyes. "And on top of that, you openly humiliated him in front of other people at a restaurant." To be perfectly exact, the one who truly humiliated him was the young lady of Claudius. I corrected her in my mind. It was downright ridiculous to see this woman, who would be completely unable to say a single protesting word to Evangeline, marching in here to angrily scold me as if she were hunting a cornered rat. "Don't tell me you've gotten a tiny little connection with the young lady, and so you're acting so arrogant and impudent," the Baroness sneered. Shaking her head, she spoke in a voice that sounded deeply pathetic, as if she were dealing with a clueless, rebellious child. "If you act stiff and difficult like you do, men won't like it. There's a very good reason Gregory dislikes you." Oh, she really is Gregory's aunt. The resemblance in their utter lack of self-awareness was staggering. Every single time she opens her mouth, a colorful, spectacular flood of bullshit pours out. A woman should be sweet, agreeable, and pretty like Serafina, just like that. Isn't that right? The Baroness continued, gesturing grandly to the girl beside her. But I had absolutely no intention of standing there quietly and listening to that toxic bullshit any longer. So I tilted my head and answered askew, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Then you should have Gregory get engaged to Serafina." "Are you done talking?" The Baroness's face hardened stiffly, completely caught off guard by my blunt retort. Meanwhile, Serafina's shoulders tightened in a visible flinch and then, Larry, you really." Perfectly timed, crystalline tears rolled down her pretty cheeks as she protested to me in a broken whisper. "Sera and Gregor are just good friends. You know that." As if she had just heard an accusation she couldn't possibly bear, Serafina's voice trembled pathetically to the very end. "How can you slander our pure friendship like that? If it were the old me, the brainwashed Larret of the past, I would have fallen for that devastated expression completely. I probably would have panicked, turned around and said I went too far, apologized profusely to Serafina, and rambled on and on begging for forgiveness. But now, no matter how close you are as friends, Gregory took much better care of you than me, his actual fiancé at the time," I stated clearly, refusing to back down. "That's just because we're childhood friends?" Serafina sobbed defensively. "I was your childhood friend too," I countered instantly. Toward Serafina, who was rarely ever left speechless, I shrugged my shoulders and fired the question back at her. But you two only ever used me as a convenient prop for your relationship, and you never respected me even once. Isn't that right? Looking at the two of them, I suddenly thought of Evangeline. Even though the young lady stood at the absolute highest position in the empire, she still maintained basic human courtesy even toward a low-ranking noble like me, someone she'd never even met before. And I remembered her sharp, validating words. What's so special about pouring a single cup of tea? Why are you suddenly self-deprecating? Even that one line had pierced straight to the core of my trauma. As I recalled that empowering moment, I steeled my heart again. I won't let Serafina and Gregory look down on me anymore. And then, "Hey, Larret!" The Baroness bellowed at me, her face purple with indignation. "Didn't Serafina save your life once? How can you be so ungrateful and repay such a massive kindness with betrayal?" Well, there it is. A familiar, exhausted pattern. First, just like this, they use the older people around them to violently stir up guilt and corner me. And then, Serafina would step in to play the savior. "It's all right, Aunt," Serafina whispered, gently placing a hand on the older woman's arm. "Sera," the Baroness sighed sympathetically. "Larry is only saying that because she's currently upset. She can't possibly mean it," Serafina insisted softly. She never, ever forgot to pretend to be the kind, forgiving saint. "You're so incredibly kind-hearted." Baroness Ventnor muttered, entirely unable to hide her regretful, loving expression toward the girl. After delicately wiping away her tears with a lace handkerchief, Serafina stared at me with mournful, pleading eyes. "But Larry, I want you to think carefully." "About what?" I asked, my voice flat. "Honestly, there's no way the young lady would treat you sincerely, right?" Serafina continued softly, her words laced with poisonous doubt. "I'm truly saying this for your own sake. No matter how cold you are to me, you're still so precious to me." "Ah, so." Mixing a heavy, mocking sigh into my voice, I looked directly into the heroine's eyes and asked her back. "You're saying the only person in this entire world who sincerely cares about me is you?" Chapter 15, at my pointed question, Serafina gave a small, delicate nod, casting her eyes downward in a perfect display of bashfulness. "I'm embarrassed to admit it, but yes," she whispered sweetly. "Once there was a time when the old Larret truly believed those words were sincere. I used to believe that Serafina really treasured me above all else, that she alone in this vast, cold world was my true friend. But now, if you attend the ducal salon and the young lady turns you into a laughingstock, what will you do then?" Serafina asked. Her voice was dripping with affection, expertly crafted to sound as though she truly, deeply worried about my well-being. "You know the rumors too, right? That the young lady doesn't even treat nobles ranked lower than her as actual people." "Ah, yes, this is exactly how you sow discord." I admired her sheer audacity inwardly. "Because that vicious rumor in the first place, you were the one who quietly guided the narrative behind the scenes so the young lady's reputation would plummet, weren't you?" Meanwhile, perhaps interpreting my silence as submission or fear, Serafina smoothly moved her silver tongue, continuing her calculated assault. "This time, for some unknown reason, she went out shopping with you. But in truth, since House Ansi is still quite a bit beneath House Claudius in standing." "Ah, there it is." Serafina's absolute specialty, striking you down and highlighting your flaws as naturally and effortlessly as breathing. "I'm truly worried you'll be hurt if you try to mingle with the young lady," Serafina sighed, reaching out as if to hold my hand. "So," putting on her most deeply concerned expression, Serafina looked up at me. "How about you speak to the young lady and ask to attend the salon together with me?" Her deep green eyes, glistening wet with perfectly timed tears, gleamed ominously. "That way, if the young lady bullies you, I can be there to help you." I let out a short, quiet scoff. "Ah, so that's it. That's what you were aiming for all along. You don't care about my safety. You just want a free ticket into the most exclusive social event of the year, and you want to use me as your stepping stone to get it. Sera cares about you this much, are you still going to act so incredibly stiff and ungrateful?" Baroness Ventnor suddenly jumped in, fiercely backing up her favorite niece. "Enough of this stubbornness. Bring Sera and Gregory to the salon too. What are friends for anyway?" There was absolutely no need to raise my voice and fight hard here. That would only make me look like the hysterical villain they desperately wanted me to be. Rather, after pretending to deeply consider their words for a moment, I finally opened my mouth. Thank you so much for worrying about me like that, Serafina, I said softly. In an instant, Serafina's beautiful face brightened. See, that stupid, pliable girl is right in the palm of my hand again. That's probably exactly what she's thinking, right? Facing Serafina, who was practically glowing with anticipated victory, I gave her a sly, curving smile. However, since I'm the one receiving the exclusive invitation, I simply don't have the room or authority to bring anyone else, I stated plainly. Larry, Serafina snapped, instantly dropping her act of being the kind, gentle saint as she sharply raised her voice. Didn't you understand what I just said? Without me there, you could be utterly humiliated. But Serafina, I said, cleanly and decisively cutting her off mid-sentence. According to you, there's no way the young lady would be sincere toward someone like me, a mere low-ranking noble, right? In an instant, Serafina's face twisted in horror. How does it feel? The very words you just used to strike me down and lower my self-esteem, turning into a sharp blade that comes right back to attack you. Feeling incredibly pleased inwardly, I tilted my head and asked her again. If I'm so insignificant, then even if someone like me begged the young lady to invite you, what use would it be? Larry, that's... Serafina stammered, frantically searching for an excuse. It'd be lucky if my asking didn't just irritate her and get me kicked out. Isn't that right? With a deliberate, overly dramatic sigh, I continued. So I think it would be much better to ask other powerful people who treasure you. For example, narrowing my eyes, I deliberately shifted my gaze to the fuming older woman on the sofa. You could ask Baroness Ventnor beside you for help. What? Baroness Ventnor's eyes bulged out of her head. I asked leisurely, feigning total innocence. Why? You can do at least that much for your precious Serafina, can't you? GRR. The Baroness's face turned a violent, bright red as her shoulders visibly trembled with rage. In truth, House Ventnor was absolutely not of a standing that would ever receive an invitation from the Claudius ducal house. But it would sting her arrogant pride far too much to admit that out loud in front of Serafina. At least a house like Count Gusto's might have the faintest, smallest chance. I mused internally. But there was no way an invitation that might or might not go to the current head of the Count's house would ever go to Gregory, the useless second son who doesn't even have a chance of inheriting the title. Which means, whether it's Gregory or Baroness Ventnor, no matter how much they fawn and flatter, they cannot receive an invitation to that salon at all. I stood up, brushing off my skirts leisurely. Then I'll be getting up first. I have to go pay my respects to the young lady now. What in the world do you mean you have to go see the young lady? How shameless of you. Having completely lost her composure, Baroness Ventnor sharply demanded. I gave them a bright, sparkling smile. Well, as you know too, Baroness, the salon will be held very soon, won't it? That salon you won't be invited to. The moment I deliberately brought up the word, salon, Serafina clenched her teeth so hard, I thought they might crack. She seems to be quite busy with preparations, so I thought I'd head over and help, however little I can. I shrugged obnoxiously. Then please return home safely. Emily will see you out. That arrogant little wretch? Baroness Ventnor gasped, looking like she was about to clutch the back of her neck and collapse from high blood pressure. Aunt, please calm down. If you get angry, it's bad for your health, Serafina said, trying hard to soothe the furious Baroness while maintaining her sweet facade. However, I saw it clearly. Serafina's eyes, as she shot a glance at my retreating back, were absolutely savage, as though she wanted to tear me apart and kill me on the spot. She looked exactly like a snake full of deadly poison. Well, even in the middle of that rage, it's impressive how she's still managing to keep her facial expression somewhat controlled. Anyway, as I was about to slip outside into the hallway, I paused with my hand resting on the ornate doorknob and glanced back over my shoulder. Oh, right, Serafina. You said you think of me as your closest friend, right? At that single, dangling line of bait, Serafina immediately put on her signature gentle, relieved smile and looked at me. Larry, do you finally understand how I really feel? She breathed. It seems she still can't let go of that tiny thread of hope that I'll invite her. I was incredibly happy to trample it into dust. If you're truly worried about me being bullied, you'll just get your own invitation and come to the salon to protect me, right? I said cheerfully. What kind of nonsense is this? As if I can just magically get one. As if screaming those exact words internally, Serafina's pretty face stiffened completely. Well, Serafina, you have so many powerful people who treasure you. It'll be incredibly easy for you to get an invitation on your own. I smiled refreshingly. I feel so reassured having a friend like you. Then I'll be waiting for you at the salon, okay? With those deeply satisfying parting words, I stepped lightly out of the drawing room. Since my morning schedule had turned out like this, I decided to visit the young lady earlier than I had originally planned. Larret requests an audience with the young lady of Claudius. I announced formally upon arriving at the ducal estate. Ah, you're here. Evangeline acknowledged me from her seat in the parlor, her face prim and proper. Sit. After offering me a seat, the young lady immediately turned hawk-eyed, her sapphire gaze thoroughly examining me from head to toe. I'll be okay, right? I swallowed my dry saliva nervously. Today, just as the young lady had specifically chosen for me in her letter, I was wearing the beautiful sky-blue lace dress, and I was even carrying the matching parasol. After inspecting me carefully, searching for any fashion flaws, the young lady soon smiled in profound satisfaction. Good, pass. I sighed inwardly in massive relief. At the same time, the young lady elegantly propped her chin on her hand, then asked me with a distinctly sulky face, "By the way, what was with that overly formal greeting just now?" "Yes," I blinked, confused. "We." After trailing off briefly, the young lady subtly averted her eyes, a faint pink dusting her cheeks. "Even if it's only temporary, we're friends, aren't we?" Chapter 16, the young lady gave me a sidelong glance, a faint blush dusting her cheeks. Deliberately putting on an indifferent, haughty voice, she continued. "It means there's absolutely no need to be so properly polite and stiff between friends," Evangeline declared, waving a delicate hand dismissively. "After all, it's just the two of us here." Friends. That single, simple word tickled warmly as it reached my ears. It wasn't a title forced upon me out of obligation, nor was it a chain used to drag me around like a convenient accessory. It was freely given. "If I'd known you were coming today, I would have told the head chef to pay a bit more attention to the tea foods," Evangeline grumbled, though her tone lacked any real bite. Then, the young lady, who had been fussing for absolutely no reason, suddenly looked at me with sparkling, eager eyes. "Ah, right. Do you like lemon cake?" she asked brightly. "We baked a fresh one today, and it was pretty tasty." For a moment the breath caught in my throat, and I was entirely at a loss for words. Countess Johansson's spring outing, the very place where my reality had shattered, where I had first realized the sheer, suffocating unfairness of this novel's world, flashed vividly through my mind. "Sierra likes refreshing snacks, right? Want to try this?" I remembered Gregory's voice. I remembered how he had looked at Serafina with eyes full of sickening affection as he carefully, personally set out a slice of bright yellow lemon cake exclusively for her. I remembered Serafina, who had cut a big piece of the cake and laughed happily as she ate it, basking in the attention. And I remembered myself, sitting there blankly across from them like an invisible ghost, swallowing my pride along with my dry tea. I liked lemon cake, too, but no one had ever cared enough to ask. "Lady Ancy." Evangeline called out to me, her brow furrowing in suspicion at my sudden, stony silence. Startled back to my senses, I hurriedly blinked away the bitter memories and answered, "Ah, yes, I like lemon cake. I like it." Those words felt incredibly strange as they brushed against the tip of my tongue. Really, how long had it been since I was actually allowed to express my own likes and dislikes? Good. The young lady's face lit up, and she smiled brightly, her eyes curving into delicate crescents. "You can look forward to it. Our ducal patissier is quite something at baking, too." After that, the afternoon bled into a perfect, golden haze. The young lady and I drank fragrant black tea paired with the refreshingly tart and sweet lemon cake, chatting aimlessly about this and that. We talked about the rare rose seedlings she'd become deeply interested in lately, the intricate lace patterns that were currently trending among the high society ladies, and even gossiped about how the new opera singer who had debuted recently was wonderfully handsome. It was normal. It was delightfully, beautifully normal. And so, around the time the cake was reduced to crumbs and the tea was running low in the silver pot, I suddenly felt a strong, nagging sense of wrongness. "Young lady, you look incredibly free right now," I thought, analyzing the situation. Isn't this exactly the point in time when there isn't much time left until the ducal house's massive salon event? Of course, as the aristocratic hostess, She wouldn't necessarily be running around doing manual labor so busy she couldn't even breathe. But shouldn't she at least be overseeing and supervising the event's progress? After cautiously reading the room, I set down my teacup and opened my mouth. By the way, young lady, is there anything I can help with? Help with what? Evangeline blinked, genuinely confused. Well, I heard there are only about 2 weeks left until the salon is held. I continued carefully, making sure not to sound accusatory. You're hosting the salon, so I thought you must be incredibly busy. If there's anything I can do, I want to help you. For a moment, a dark cloud passed over the young lady's usually vibrant expression. As if she had something heavy sitting on her chest, her lips moved to speak, but then she went HMPH and stubbornly turned her head away. It's fine, she muttered. My brother will take care of everything anyway, the young lady added, somehow looking both incredibly sulky and deeply guilty. He's always been like that since we were little. He says he'll do all the hard things himself and only tells me to stay comfortable and rest. Young lady, of course I'm grateful that my brother thinks of me and protects me. The young lady's delicate shoulders drooped heavily, the fight draining out of her. But he doesn't have to do it all alone. Her brilliant sapphire eyes sank with a complicated, sorrowful light. Because of me, it feels like my brother pushes himself to the brink every single time, she confessed softly. Like I'm selfishly piling this massive salon work on top of someone who's already impossibly busy. With a deeply regretful gaze, I looked at the young lady who had drawn her shoulders in, making herself look uncharacteristically small. She's worried about the Duke, I realized. Well, of course she would be. The Duke of Claudius, Dietrich, was unarguably one of the busiest men in the entire empire. He managed a vast duchy and the countless people who lived in it, commanded legions of vassals under him, and oversaw all sorts of massive enterprises. Even that alone was more than enough responsibility for Dietrich to look after, yet on top of that staggering workload, he was the head of the absolute most influential noble house in the empire. If you also considered the delicate matter of exchanging political favors with other nobles, and even managing his complex relationship with the imperial family, maybe even 24 hours in a day wouldn't be enough for him, I concluded. Ugh, I couldn't live like that even if I tried. Shuddering inwardly at the thought of that horrific workload, I subtly tossed the young lady a probing question. Have you looked over the salon-related documents at all? The young lady shook her head, looking entirely downcast. No. Then, young lady, I said gently, leaning forward. I lowered my head slightly to ensure I met her eyes directly. Still, since you're the official host, wouldn't it be all right to at least review the related documents? That's so, she asked hesitantly. Of course. Letting go of everything entirely, and at the very least, understanding the situation are two completely different things. I explained, nodding with emphasis. Above all else, there was a harsh reality at play here. The Duke cherishes the young lady deeply, so he's probably being overly considerate so she can live comfortably on purpose. I glanced at the young lady out of the corner of my eye. But in the long run, she has to know how to handle documents like this, too. There were a few critical reasons for that. First, the young lady is one of only 2 direct-line members of House Claudius. Even if she doesn't handle the gritty practical affairs herself, shouldn't she at least know how her own ducal house is run? And the very basis of that work is understanding documents, after all. And second, and perhaps more urgently, because she can't let Serafina walk all over her. In the original story, a devastating scene like this appears. In the latter half of the novel, when Serafina and the young lady's confrontation reaches its absolute peak, a massive fraud case breaks out. Merchants import high-end perfume materials from overseas and sell them, but they maliciously inflate the supply costs and swindle the nobles blind. And Serafina is the one who brilliantly finds the inflated cost portion hidden deep in the sales documents and brings it to light. Consequently, her reputation in high society shoots straight up into the stratosphere, when in fact, that inflated cost was something the original Larret, meaning me, caught while doing her dirty work. Well, naturally, because of the plot's sickening bias, it magically became Serafina's grand achievement. And Serafina steered that situation entirely to her own advantage. They say Lady Lopez found something even the young lady of Claudius couldn't find. Lady Lopez is truly amazing. Though the young lady seems a bit incompetent, more than I thought. From Evangeline's perspective, it must have been incredibly, suffocatingly unfair. In reality, the ducal house didn't even get swindled with that perfume matter. There just happened to be perfume materials mixed in among the various gifts sent to the young lady, and suddenly the disastrous sparks of the scandal flew her way. And Serafina's truly crafty part was that she subtly planted seeds of suspicion in people's minds. You say the young lady received it as a gift, but she could have bought it herself and is just making excuses, you know? Whispering poisons like that. Anyway, to prevent a disastrous problem like that, just in case, it would be exceptionally good for the young lady to learn at least how to read basic administrative documents now, I reasoned. More than anything else, my perception of her had drastically changed. I thought she had absolutely no interest in work at all, but that wasn't it. In the original novel, the author praised only Serafina at length, while the young lady was described strictly as an arrogant, extravagant villainess with an empty, spoiled head. And I had initially thought so too. But the real Evangeline I'd actually met was different. If it's only that she never had the proper chance to learn because of her overprotective brother, then I can help her. I steeled myself, my resolve hardening. Well, if Lady Ansi says it that far, Evangeline murmured, already putting on her prim, aristocratic expression again. She gestured gracefully to the waiting maids and ordered them to bring the salon-related documents from the study. Shortly after, the young lady and I sat facing each other across the table, with thick, neatly stacked piles of documents resting ominously in front of us. Roughly speaking, there were lists of the artists attending the salon, the comprehensive guest list, the massive budget plan for the event, and architectural diagrams containing the salon's interior layout. The young lady stared intensely into the documents with a deeply ambiguous expression. Once the complex papers were actually laid out in front of her, she looked like a lost child who didn't know what was what. Well, of course, I thought sympathetically. She'd never done anything like this up to now. But the ducal house's budget plan is highly sensitive financial material, so it felt a bit inappropriate and off for me, an outsider, to say I'd look at the ledgers first. In the meantime, as I scanned the table, one particular document caught my eye. Chapter 17, I reached out across the table and carefully unfolded the large, detailed architectural diagram of the salon's interior layout. It was a meticulously drawn blueprint. I could clearly see the designated areas for a lavish buffet-style food table, the exact placement of the various artworks on display, and plush velvet sofas strategically arranged where nobles and writers could sit comfortably to debate. And scattered heavily throughout the venue were intricate floral decorations meant to add brightness and life to the grand hall. The composition itself had nothing major to criticize. It was standard, opulent, and perfectly acceptable for a high society gathering. However, young lady, I began, opening my mouth without overthinking it. This is just my humble opinion, but I don't think there's any real need to put out this many flower decorations. Why? Evangeline asked, leaning over the blueprint with a puzzled frown. Well, I think having this many vibrant blooms might severely interfere with the flow of viewing the actual works, I explained. I pointed a slender finger to a specific spot on the parchment, a drawing of a massive floral arrangement positioned right in the center of the gallery. Even just taking this vase, for example, it's drawn to be as big as a person's torso. If this massive vase is sitting right here, won't the guests' gazes that should be directed toward the delicate artworks naturally gather over here instead? For a long moment, Evangeline simply stared at the spot I was pointing to, her blue eyes round like a startled cat. The realization washed over her instantly. She fixed the diagram with a sharp, newly focused gaze. "You're right," she murmured, her tone shifting to one of serious contemplation. "So, how about we remove this large vase and the excessive surrounding arrangements and instead pay a bit more attention to the lighting?" I suggested gently. "Lighting," she echoed. "Yes, the salon's true main characters are the artworks on display, after all." I continued explaining calmly, drawing on my extensive observations of high society events. So that those artworks can shine even more, what if we take specialized advice from a technician and place the gallery lights accordingly to highlight the canvases? That's incredibly good advice. Evangeline nodded, thoroughly impressed. Then should I ask the administrators to increase the lighting budget? Rather than doing that, I think we could simply reduce the unnecessarily large flower-related budget a little and put the money we save directly into the lighting, I answered practically. At that entirely logical, cost-saving suggestion, the young lady suddenly went completely quiet. Huh, flustered by the sudden silence, I lifted my head slightly to gauge her reaction. In that moment, I saw it. The young lady was staring directly at me, her brilliant sapphire eyes sparkling so brightly they practically had stars in them. Why is she suddenly looking at me like that? It's burdensome. In the end, entirely unable to withstand that intense, twinkling-eyed attack of pure admiration, I cautiously opened my mouth to offer a compromise. I might not be able to help much with the heavy lifting, but I can at least sit here and help you review the rest of the documents. Really? Unable to contain her sheer excitement at having a competent ally, the young lady actually sprang up from her seat. Of course, realizing her deeply unaristocratic reaction, she quickly came to her senses. She coughed into her fist for no reason, and sat back down with forced gracefulness. Then go ahead and help me, she ordered, trying to sound haughty but failing miserably. Really, she's adorable. Laughing briefly to myself at her transparent tsundere act, I reached across the table and picked up the thick guest list first. No matter what, the ducal house's financial budget was highly sensitive, so it felt a bit awkward and inappropriate to pry into that right away. I planned to check only the materials that would be perfectly fine for an outsider, like me to see. As I quickly scanned the impeccably written names on the guest list, my eyes suddenly gleamed wickedly. As expected. Well, considering how much Evangeline despised Serafina, it was only natural. On the extensive, highly exclusive guest list, not only were Serafina Lopez and Gregory Gusto entirely absent, but the entire Gusto Count's family wasn't listed anywhere at all. Late that night, long after the moon had risen over the capital, Dietrich von Claudius entered the grand foyer of the ducal townhouse with a deeply weary face. Phew. Letting out a long, exhausted sigh without realizing it, the Duke irritably tugged at the crisp white cravat that was currently choking his neck. Truly, I don't even know how time is passing these days. Today, too, had been an absolute whirlwind of political meetings, estate management, and imperial politics. But the endless mountain of things Dietrich had to handle only seemed to keep increasing. "Welcome back, Your Grace." The elderly butler greeted him respectfully, bowing low as the Duke handed over his coat. "Your bedchamber has been prepared. Please go and rest quickly." "No, there's still something I need to look into tonight. Bring me a strong cup of coffee in my study," Dietrich commanded, rubbing his temples. Shaking his head to clear the exhaustion, Dietrich glanced at the loyal butler out of the corner of his eye. "Come to think of it, how are the salon preparations going?" Since quite a number of famous, influential artists emerged from this very salon, the ducal house absolutely could not afford to be careless about its execution. And so Dietrich, even while being suffocatingly busy, had been carving out precious time late at night to check on the salon's progress behind the scenes. Your Grace, there is something I must tell you about that." The butler spoke cautiously, hesitating for a brief moment. "The young lady personally reviewed the related documents for this salon today and sent her opinions down to the administrators." Dietrich stopped walking. He looked at the butler, visibly surprised. Eva did? Evangeline. His only younger sister had always been a deeply tender spot in Dietrich's hardened heart. Dietrich had lost his parents far too early and had been forced to inherit the heavy ducal seat while still practically a boy. Becoming the empire's only duke at such a young age, Dietrich was forced to grow rapidly into an excellent, ruthless lord admired by all, and an impeccable great noble. But even he had a shadow of guilt. He had been so incredibly busy securing their position that it was difficult to properly look after his younger sister's emotional needs. Perhaps because of that lingering guilt, he didn't want his little sister to ever suffer. He had only given her the nominal, ceremonial position of mistress of the house, and he meticulously ensured that the administrators and staff around them could quietly take on all the difficult, stressful matters so she wouldn't have to lift a finger. His vassals had often voiced their concerns. "Things are fine now, Your Grace, but what will you do if the young lady marries in the future?" They would ask. If the young lady becomes the mistress of another great house, she will have to know how to manage that household as a proper mistress. To those valid concerns, Dietrich had always replied coldly, without so much as twitching an eyebrow. What good are immense wealth and manpower for if you don't use them? Pardon. If Eva marries, we can simply dispatch a team of our best administrators to support her along with her dowry. He had planned to send a massive dowry that would leave the receiving house entirely unable to say a single protesting word, along with at least 10 elite administrators to do her work for her. The vassals had shaken their heads in dismay at his blatant favoritism, but Dietrich was dead serious. Rather than sit back and watch Evangeline suffer through tedious administrative work, it was far better to just keep supporting her with the family's endless resources. And yet, that very sister he'd raised so carefully as a sheltered flower in a greenhouse. Eva reviewed documents. She doesn't need to know complicated things like that, Dietrich thought. While he found Evangeline's sudden initiative somewhat admirable, he also couldn't help but feel a prick of dissatisfaction that she had gone out of her way looking for difficult work to put her pristine hands on. Clicking his tongue inwardly, Dietrich held out his hand to the butler. "Let me see them first." "Here you are, Your Grace." The butler politely handed over the leather-bound folder. In truth, up to this point, Dietrich had absolutely no particular expectations. Since she'd never received any related administrative education, the documents would probably be amateurish, so-so at best. But only a moment after he opened the folder and began flipping through the crisp parchment pages under the flickering candlelight, his icy blue eyes widened slightly in genuine shock. "This is..." Eva wrote these documents. It was a truly perfect, flawlessly optimized diagram. After examining the revised floor plans for a long while, noting the brilliant reallocation of the floral budget into lighting, Dietrich shifted his intense gaze to the documents stacked behind it. It was the master guest list. Since the ducal house alone selected and invited the guests, he had assumed there wouldn't be any special notes needed. A few pieces of incredibly sharp advice regarding the guests had been attached to the margins in elegant handwriting. Since older nobles will mainly attend, it seems best to take care that the seating is as physically comfortable as possible. Since there are some nobles with bad drinking habits who become belligerent, how about providing low-proof alcohol to maintain decorum? From such broad, thoughtful advice, it drilled down into shockingly detailed social engineering. Lady So-and-so and Lady So-and-so are currently not on good terms due to a recent dispute, so keep their seating as far apart as possible. Poetry has been heavily trending among the younger nobles lately, so it may help stimulate conversation to have many related books on hand. It was detailed advice characteristic of a seasoned socialite who had spent a very long time quietly observing the undercurrents of high society. Seeing even that level of social mastery, Dietrich became absolutely certain. These aren't documents Evangeline could make alone. In these papers, he could distinctly feel the seasoned ease of someone who had built up related education, patience, and observational experience over a long time. And Evangeline had neither that grueling experience nor that specific education. More than anything else, Evangeline is of a rank that can be counted on one hand, even in the Empire. To pay such careful, tedious attention to the trivial relationships and petty feuds of lower nobles just to arrange their seats comfortably, the position of the young lady of Claudius is far too high to care about such peasant squabbles. His sister, who had lived her entire life without ever needing to care about others' reactions, couldn't possibly be this meticulous. "These documents, are they really what Eva sent down?" Dietrich asked, his voice sharp and questioning. "Yes, they are, however." The butler trailed off. "However." At Dietrich's tilted head and demanding gaze, the butler bowed once again. "I understand that, while reviewing and writing the documents, the young lady received Lady Ansie's help," the butler revealed. "Lady Ansie." Dietrich closed the folder, rolling the unfamiliar name around in his mouth thoughtfully as the candlelight danced in his deep blue eyes. Chapter 18. In the quiet solitude of his dimly lit study, Dietrich von Claudius leaned back in his heavy leather chair. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic, hypnotic ticking of the grandfather clock and the faint crackle of the fireplace. Spread out across his massive mahogany desk were the salon preparation documents. His long, elegant fingers traced the margins, brushing over the meticulous, insightful notes written in elegant handwriting. Lady Ansi. Dietrich murmured into the silence, the name rolling off his tongue with a strange, unfamiliar weight. Viscount Ansi's daughter, Larret. Dietrich possessed a memory as sharp as a finely honed blade, and as the head of the Empire's most powerful house, he naturally kept a mental ledger of all the notable nobles in the capital. But Larret Ansi had barely registered as a footnote. If he recalled correctly, she was famously known only as the quiet, dreary shadow of Serafina Lopez. Rumors painted her as a timid girl with no presence, no particular talents, and absolutely no pride. Someone who willingly fetched teacups and carried shopping bags for the dazzling heroine of high society. But the woman who drafted these documents is no one's shadow, Dietrich thought, his icy blue eyes narrowing in profound intrigue. The social engineering displayed in the seating arrangements, the ruthless efficiency of the budget reallocation, the keen understanding of high society psychology. It was the work of a seasoned strategist. A person like that wouldn't willingly play the fool for years unless they had a compelling reason, or perhaps unless society had been entirely blind to her true nature. A faint, dangerous smirk touched the corner of the Duke's lips. Evangeline, his prickly, impossible-to-please sister, had not only allowed this woman into her inner circle, but had actually listened to her advice. Interesting. Dietrich closed the leather folder with a decisive snap. He had originally planned to skip the salon entirely, leaving it to Evangeline as usual while he attended to an endless mountain of imperial administrative duties. But suddenly, the tedious prospect of political meetings seemed far less appealing than unraveling the mystery of Larret Ansi. "I'll have to adjust my schedule for the weekend," he whispered to the empty room. He needed to see this hidden strategist with his own two eyes. The morning of the Claudius Ducal salon arrived with brilliant, unapologetic sunshine pouring through the windows of the Ansi townhouse. "Miss, oh miss, you look absolutely breathtaking." Amy, my faithful maid, was practically vibrating with excitement, her hands clasped together as she stared at me in the full-length mirror. I had to admit, as I looked at my own reflection, my breath hitched slightly. The Madame Christensen gown was a masterpiece of soft, ethereal pink silk that seemed to catch and hold the morning light. It was tailored to perfection, cinching my waist before flowing down in elegant, sweeping folds. My raven black hair, usually a heavy, unkempt curtain, was pinned up in a sophisticated half-style, intertwined with delicate silver threads. I looked like a proper noble lady. No, more than that, I looked like someone who belonged exactly where she was going. "I am not a shoe wiper anymore," I told my reflection, squaring my shoulders. "I am Larret Ansi, the invited guest of the young lady of Claudius." Stepping out of the carriage at the sprawling ducal estate an hour later, I was immediately hit by the sheer, overwhelming scale of the event. Dozens of luxurious carriages, bearing the crests of the wealthiest families in the empire, were lined up along the manicured gravel driveway. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the low, excited hum of aristocratic chatter. As I ascended the grand marble staircase and handed my golden-edged invitation to the imposing guards at the door, I could already feel the heavy weight of dozens of eyes turning toward me. "Wait, isn't that Lady Ansi? Why is she here? I didn't see Lady Lopez arrive. Good heavens, look at her dress. Is that a Christensen original? How did she afford that?" The whispers rippled through the grand foyer like a wave. For years, my existence in high society had been defined entirely by my proximity to Serafina. Seeing me arrive alone, walking with my head held high, dressed in a gown that outshone half the room, it was sending shockwaves through the gossiping nobles. I ignored them entirely, keeping a serene, unbothered smile on my face as I stepped into the main exhibition hall. And the moment I crossed the threshold, a genuine gasp of awe escaped my lips. It's perfect. The massive, overbearing floral arrangements that usually choked the center of the room were gone. Instead, the lighting was a stroke of absolute genius. The gallery was bathed in a warm, ambient glow, with specialized, focused beams of light illuminating the canvases and sculptures. The art practically jumped off the walls, demanding attention. The velvet seating areas were pushed to the perfect conversational distances, and the entire atmosphere felt elegant, breathable, and deeply refined. Lady Ansi. A clear, musical voice cut through the ambient noise. The entire hall seemed to freeze as Evangeline von Claudius, the notoriously prickly and unapproachable hostess, practically glided across the polished marble floor toward me. She was radiant in a deep sapphire gown that matched her eyes, but what shocked the onlookers most wasn't her beauty. It was the genuine, brilliant smile on her face. "You came exactly on time," Evangeline said, reaching out to lightly grasp my hands. It was an unprecedented display of public affection from the ice queen of high society. "Congratulations on hosting such a magnificent salon, young lady," I replied warmly, dipping into a perfect curtsy. "The lighting is truly spectacular. The artworks look absolutely alive." Evangeline's cheeks dusted with a faint, proud pink. "It's all thanks to the excellent advice I received from a certain friend," she said, her voice carrying just enough for the eavesdropping nobles to hear. The collective gasp from the surrounding ladies was almost comical. "Friend?" The young lady of Claudius just called Larret Ansi her friend. I could practically hear the social hierarchy of the capital violently restructuring itself in real time. "Come, there is a particular painting I want to show you before the crowd gets too thick," Evangeline insisted, linking her arm through mine as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But just as we took a step forward, a sudden heavy silence fell over the grand hall. It wasn't just a lull in conversation, it was a physical drop in the atmosphere, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The massive oak doors at the far end of the gallery swung open. Step, step. The sound of polished leather boots echoed against the marble. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, nobles bowing their heads in deep, instinctual reverence. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to look. Walking into the hall with an aura of absolute, suffocating dominance was Dietrich von Claudius. His pale platinum hair caught the ambient light, and his sharp, flawlessly sculpted features were set in an expression of cool authority. The Duke almost never attended these daytime social events, leaving the nobles utterly bewildered by his sudden appearance. But what made my breath catch in my throat wasn't just his overwhelming presence. It was the fact that his piercing, icy blue eyes swept past the bowing crowds, past the priceless artworks, and locked directly, unblinkingly, onto me. Chapter 19, the silence in the grand exhibition hall was absolute, heavy enough to crush a person's lungs. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of suffocating stillness that occurs when an apex predator suddenly steps into a clearing. Hundreds of high-ranking nobles, people who usually wielded immense power and influence with a mere flick of their wrists, were currently holding their breath, their eyes glued to the towering figure striding across the marble floor. Dietrich von Claudius, the empire's sharpest sword, the absolute ruler of the north, and a man whose cold, untouchable demeanor was as legendary as his devastatingly handsome face. Step, step, step. The rhythmic, echoing sound of his polished leather boots grew louder, and with every step he took, my internal panic skyrocketed. Why is he walking this way? I screamed internally, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. No, wait. Evangeline is standing right next to me. Of course he's walking toward his sister. Get a grip, Larret. I desperately tried to rationalize the situation, but the sheer intensity of his icy blue gaze made it impossible to look away. Those eyes, sharp and calculating, weren't looking at Evangeline. They were fixed entirely, unblinkingly upon me. "Brother!" Evangeline broke the suffocating silence, her voice a mixture of genuine shock and mild suspicion. She unconsciously took a half-step forward, placing herself slightly in front of me, as if shielding me from a sudden storm. "What are you doing here? You explicitly said you had back-to-back state council meetings today." Dietrich finally halted a few paces away from us. Up close, his overwhelming presence was almost dizzying. The stark contrast of his pale platinum hair against the severe, pitch-black military-style formal where he wore made him look like a dark, beautiful statue carved from ice. "Meetings can be rescheduled, Eva," Dietrich replied, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips as he looked down at his sister. "I couldn't possibly miss the grand opening of the salon you worked so incredibly hard to prepare." "Ah!" Evangeline's cheeks flared with a brilliant, guilty pink. She quickly averted her eyes, clearly remembering the massive stack of administrative documents she had desperately struggled with. But Dietrich didn't dwell on his sister's embarrassment. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted his gaze back to me. "And yet," the Duke murmured, the playful warmth leaving his voice replaced by a cool, piercing curiosity. "I find myself most intrigued by the brilliant innovations in this year's arrangements." My breath hitched, he knew. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. He saw the documents. He recognized the changes in the blueprint, the lighting, the seating arrangements. "Brother, this is Lady Larret Ansi," Evangeline interjected, quickly regaining her aristocratic composure. She gestured toward me with a proud lift of her chin. "She is my temporary friend and my honored guest for today." Lady Ansi. Dietrich tasted the name, rolling it around his mouth, as if testing its weight. I forced my trembling knees to lock into place. This was the ultimate test. If I cowered here, if I acted like the pathetic, stuttering shadow of Serafina that high society expected me to be, I would lose all the ground I had so painstakingly built with Evangeline. Summoning every ounce of etiquette I had ever learned, I pinched the delicate silk of my Madame Christensen gown and sank into a flawless, textbook-perfect curtsy. "I am Larret of House Ansi, Your Grace," I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady, loud enough for the eavesdropping nobles surrounding us to hear clearly. "It is an absolute honor to meet the son of the North." "The honor is mine, Lady Ansi," Dietrich replied smoothly, and then the unthinkable happened. Instead of offering a simple nod of acknowledgement, the Duke of Claudius closed the remaining distance between us. He reached out with a large, elegantly gloved hand and gently took my right hand. Slowly, never breaking eye contact, he bowed at the waist and pressed his lips lightly against the back of my knuckles. Gasp! A collective, synchronized intake of breath swept through the entire gallery. Several elderly countesses looked as though they were about to collapse from sheer shock, frantically fanning themselves. The Duke of Claudius, a man famously known for his severe misophobia and absolute disdain for physical contact with the opposite sex, had just initiated a formal, highly respectful kiss of greeting to the daughter of a mere viscount. Crazy, 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 what is he doing? My mind went entirely blank. The spot on my hand where his lips had brushed felt as though it were on fire. "I must admit, Lady Ansi," Dietrich continued smoothly, releasing my hand as he straightened his tall frame. I was quite astonished by the interior of the salon today. Discarding the traditional, cumbersome floral arrangements in favor of specialized lighting to highlight the artist's canvases, it is a remarkably sophisticated and cost-effective strategy. His icy blue eyes narrowed slightly, pinning me in place. One might even think such a meticulously calculated revision was the work of a seasoned veteran of high society. The trap was set. He was testing me in front of everyone. If I took the credit, I would publicly humiliate Evangeline, making her look like a puppet hostess. If I denied everything, I would look like a liar to the man who clearly already knew the truth. I smiled, a serene, unbothered expression settling over my face. "You praise me too highly, Your Grace, but I merely offered a passing thought as a spectator," I answered smoothly, tilting my head slightly. It was the young lady's brilliant insight and decisive leadership that recognized the value of that passing thought and flawlessly executed it. Without her bold judgment, this beautiful venue would not exist. Evangeline's eyes widened, shimmering with sudden, profound touch. Dietrich stared at me for a long, silent moment. The heavy, calculating weight behind his gaze seemed to peel back my layers, analyzing my words, my posture, and my sheer audacity. Then, a low, genuine chuckle escaped his lips. "A passing thought, you say?" the Duke murmured, the corners of his eyes crinkling in undeniable amusement. "How remarkably humble. It seems my sister has finally found herself a companion with a truly fascinating mind." Before I could even process the massive compliment, a sharp, familiar voice violently shattered the elegant atmosphere of the hall. Larret. I didn't even need to turn my head to know who it was. The shrill, perfectly pitched tone of absolute disbelief belonged to only one person. Standing near the grand entrance, wearing a dress that was clearly out of season and panting as if she had argued her way past the guards, was Serafina. And right behind her, looking equally horrified and desperate, was Gregory. The heroine and the ex-fiancé had finally crashed the party. Chapter 20. Larret. The shrill, desperate voice ripped through the refined, hushed atmosphere of the grand exhibition hall like a screeching violin string. Every single head in the gallery turned toward the grand oak doors. The high-ranking nobles, who had just been holding their breath in awe of the Duke's unprecedented display of favor toward me, now stared at the entrance with expressions of profound aristocratic disgust. I slowly turned my head, my face an impenetrable mask of calm. Standing there, looking completely out of breath and utterly out of place, was Serafina. She was wearing a dress that was noticeably out of season, a heavy, frilly spring gown that clashed violently with the sleek, sophisticated trends of the current social season. Her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and right behind her, looking red-faced and awkwardly defiant, was Gregory Gusto. How on earth did they get past the guards? I wondered, my eyes narrowing. Given the strict security of the Claudius ducal estate, they must have caused an absolute screaming scene at the gates, likely dropping my name and insisting they were my companions who had merely arrived late. The contrast between us couldn't have been more brutal if it had been staged. I stood perfectly poised beside the two most powerful figures in the empire, draped in a bespoke Madame Christensen gown that glowed under the gallery's specialized lighting. Meanwhile, Serafina looked like a frantic commoner who had accidentally wandered into a royal banquet. "Larry, how could you?" Serafina cried out, her deep green eyes instantly welling up with her signature, perfectly timed tears. Ignoring the hundreds of piercing stares, she took a few hurried steps into the hall, lifting her skirts. She was going straight for her classic playbook, playing the pitiful, abandoned victim. "I waited for you all morning," she whimpered, clasping her hands over her chest as she looked at me with heartbreaking betrayal. "You said we would attend the salon together. How could you leave your best friend behind and come all by yourself?" A low murmur rippled through the crowd. If I didn't handle this perfectly, her twisted narrative would paint me as a treacherous, social climbing snake who abandoned her loyal friend the moment she got a taste of high society. But before I could even open my mouth to cleanly slice her lies in half, the air pressure in the room plummeted. "Best friend?" The voice was soft, laced with a dangerous, icy amusement. Evangeline von Claudius stepped forward, her sapphire gown whispering against the marble floor. She tilted her head, looking at Serafina with a gaze so cold it could have frozen a raging river. "I was the one who finalized the guest list for this salon," the young lady declared, her voice carrying effortlessly across the silent hall. "And I am quite certain that the names Serafina Lopez and Gregory Gusto were nowhere on that list." Serafina froze mid-step, her tearful expression cracking. "Why, young lady, an invitation to the Claudius ducal salon is not a +1 ticket to a village festival," Evangeline continued, her words falling like the sharp strikes of a guillotine. She looked Serafina up and down, her lip curling in undisguised disdain. "To force your way into my estate, screaming the name of my honored guest, and then dare to cause a scene in front of the empire's finest artists and nobles. Have you no shame, Lady Lopez?" "And no, that isn't," Larry told me. Serafina stammered, frantically looking at me for a lifeline, her face draining of all color. "What did I tell you, Serafina?" I finally spoke, my voice serene, echoing clearly in the vast space. I took a slow, elegant step forward, looking down at her with a gentle, pitying smile. "When you and Baroness Ventnor barged into my home yesterday, demanding I bring you here, what exactly did I say?" Gregory, who had been hiding behind Serafina's skirts, suddenly flared up. "Larret, stop lying to save face. You're the one who deliberately humiliated Sera by sneaking out." I didn't even blink at his outburst. I simply let out a soft, elegant sigh, looking at the two of them as if they were tragic, unruly children. "I told you very clearly that the invitations to the ducal salon are strictly exclusive and non-transferable," I said, projecting my voice so the surrounding countesses and marquises could hear every single word. "I explicitly advised you that if you truly wished to attend, you would need to secure your own invitations through the proper channels. I never once promised to bring you." I paused, letting the silence stretch for a devastating second. "Did you truly think you could just trick the guards and force your way into His Grace's home by screaming my name?" Gasp. The whispers among the nobles erupted into a vicious, buzzing swarm. How incredibly vulgar. To gatecrash the ducal salon. Have they lost their minds? Look at her dress. She doesn't belong here at all. House Lopez and House Gusto must have abandoned all face and dignity. Serafina's jaw dropped. The whispers of the high society she had so desperately tried to manipulate were now tearing her apart. The absolute, unshakable heroine's halo she had relied on for years was shattering into a million pieces right before my eyes. I didn't. Gregor say something. Serafina panicked, violently tugging on Gregory's sleeve. But Gregory couldn't speak. He wasn't even looking at me. His bulging eyes were fixed entirely on the towering, terrifying figure standing just behind my shoulder. Dietrich von Claudius hadn't said a single word since the gatecrashers arrived. He didn't need to. The Duke simply stared at Gregory, his icy blue eyes completely devoid of any human warmth. It was the exact gaze a man might use when looking at a cockroach that had scurried across his dining table. Under that suffocating, apex predator stare, Gregory visibly trembled. His knees literally knocked together, his face turning an ashen, sickly white. The arrogant, entitled second son of a count was entirely paralyzed by the sheer terror of facing the ruler of the North. "Guards!" Dietrich finally spoke, just one word. Instantly, the heavy clanking of plate armor echoed from the hallway. 4 towering elite knights of the Claudius Ducal Guard marched into the gallery, their hands resting menacingly on the pommels of their swords. "Your Grace!" The captain of the guard bowed deeply. "It seems we have a pest problem at the door," the Duke murmured lazily, not even bothering to look at Serafina and Gregory anymore. He turned his attention back to me, his expression softening into that dangerous, fascinating smirk. "Remove the trespassers from the premises. If they resist, you have my permission to treat them as active threats to the ducal house." "No, wait, Larry, please." Serafina shrieked as 2 massive knights grabbed her by the arms, effortlessly lifting her off the floor. Her delicate victim act completely evaporated into genuine, ugly panic. "Unhand me. Do you know who my father is?" Gregory yelled, thrashing wildly, only to be forcefully restrained and dragged backward by the collar of his coat. "I apologize for the unsightly disturbance, Lady Ansi," Dietrich said smoothly, entirely ignoring the screaming gatecrashers being hauled out the doors. He offered me his arm, bowing slightly. "Shall we resume our tour of the gallery? I believe Eva wanted to show you a particular landscape." I looked at the Duke's offered arm, then at Evangeline, who was beaming with fierce, vindictive pride. "It would be my pleasure, Your Grace." I smiled brightly, slipping my gloved hand through the crook of his arm. As the massive oak doors slammed shut, cutting off Serafina's hysterical sobs and Gregory's pathetic yelling, I felt a profound, exhilarating weight lift off my chest. The invisible chains of the original story were finally, permanently broken. I wasn't the miserable Villainess's lackey or the heroine's stepping stone. I was Larret Ansi, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. Chapter 21. The heavy oak doors of the grand exhibition hall remained shut, but the echoing thud of their closure seemed to linger in the air long after Serafina and Gregory had been dragged away. For a few seconds, the gallery was trapped in a suspended, breathless silence. Then, like a dam breaking, the murmurs of the high nobility flooded the room. But this time, the whispers weren't directed at me with scorn or confusion. "Did you see His Grace's face?" He didn't even blink when he ordered the guards. "House Lopez is finished to cause a scene like that in front of the Duke. And Lady Ansi, how utterly composed she was. She didn't even raise her voice. I always thought she was just Lady Lopez's shadow. Good heavens, we were all entirely blind." I kept my gaze forward, my hand resting lightly in the crook of Dietrich von Claudius's arm. Through the fine fabric of his tailored, midnight black suit, I could feel the solid, steady warmth of his forearm. He smelled faintly of crisp pine, cold winter air, and an incredibly expensive, subtle cologne that made my head spin just a fraction. "You possess a remarkably calm temperament, Lady Ansi," Dietrich murmured, his deep voice vibrating close to my ear as he led me smoothly through the parting sea of awestruck nobles. Most young ladies would have fainted, or at least wept, at such a vulgar public ambush. I glanced up at his sharp, perfectly sculpted profile. Was he testing me again? "Tears are a weapon only effective when someone actually cares to see them fall, Your Grace," I replied smoothly, a serene smile curving my lips. "I prefer to use facts. They are far less exhausting and infinitely more devastating." A low, rich chuckle rumbled in the Duke's chest. It was a beautiful sound, one that completely contradicted his terrifying apex predator reputation. Fascinating, he whispered, his icy blue eyes gleaming with an intoxicating mixture of amusement and profound intrigue. I am beginning to understand exactly why my sister is so fiercely protective of you. Ahem. Evangeline, who was walking proudly on my other side, coughed loudly into her lace-gloved hand. Despite her attempt to look haughty and unbothered, the tips of her ears were burning a brilliant, telltale pink. Brother, please. You're making Lady Ancy uncomfortable with your staring, and I told you there is a specific painting I want to show her. Of course, Eva. Lead the way. Dietrich conceded effortlessly, though his gaze lingered on me for a dangerous, heart-stopping second longer before he turned his attention to the gallery walls. Evangeline guided us toward the center of the hall, stopping before a massive, breathtaking canvas. Thanks to the specialized, focused lighting I had suggested, the painting seemed to glow from within, completely dominating the space it occupied. It was a magnificent landscape depicting a turbulent, stormy ocean breaking against a towering, immovable cliff at dawn. The dark, violent waves were painted in harsh, aggressive strokes, but breaking through the bruised clouds was a single, piercing ray of golden sunlight, illuminating the resilient stone. The artist is a relatively unknown painter from the eastern provinces, Evangeline explained, her voice taking on the refined, knowledgeable tone of a true ducal hostess. When I first saw it in the storage rooms, it was shoved in a dark corner. The administrators thought it was too gloomy for a high society salon. She turned to look at me, her sapphire eyes shining with a deep, unspoken vulnerability. But I thought it was beautiful. It doesn't pretend to be a peaceful, pretty garden. It shows exactly how hard it is to weather a storm and how beautiful the light is when you finally do. My breath hitched. I looked at the painting, then at the young lady. She wasn't just talking about the artwork. She was talking about herself. She was talking about the vicious rumors, the isolation, the sheer, suffocating pressure of being the villainess of high society, and the sudden, golden relief of finally having someone standing firmly by her side. It is an absolute masterpiece, young lady, I said softly, my voice thick with genuine emotion. The administrators were fools. It takes a truly discerning, brilliant eye to recognize the value of something that the rest of the world has unfairly dismissed. Evangeline's breath caught. She stared at me, her eyes shimmering suspiciously under the gallery lights. For a moment, the untouchable Ice Queen looked exactly like a normal, deeply moved young girl who had just been handed the entire world. Indeed, Dietrich's deep voice suddenly cut through the heavy emotional atmosphere, though his tone was surprisingly gentle. I turned my head slightly, only to find that the Duke wasn't looking at the painting at all. He was looking directly at me. It takes a rare and brilliant eye to recognize true value when it is hidden in the shadows. Dietrich echoed my words, his gaze sweeping over my face, my styled hair, and the exquisite Madame Christensen gown. And it takes even greater courage to bring that hidden value into the light. My heart gave a violent, treacherous leap against my ribs. Is it getting incredibly hot in this gallery, or is it just him? I swallowed hard, desperately trying to maintain my composed facade, though I was entirely certain my cheeks were flushing. Thank you, Your Grace. I managed to murmur, briefly breaking eye contact to stare very intensely at a painted wave on the canvas. Lady Ancy. Evangeline suddenly spoke up, her voice surprisingly firm, completely breaking the strange, magnetic tension between her brother and me. I blinked, turning my attention back to the young lady. She was standing perfectly straight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself for a massive, life-altering decision. Yes, young lady. The probation period is over, Evangeline declared, her chin lifting in that familiar, defensive aristocratic pride, though her eyes were desperately earnest. Excuse me, I asked, genuinely confused for a moment. The contract, she hissed, her face turning a violent shade of red. The temporary friend contract we made in the glass conservatory. You've passed the probation period, flawlessly. I stared at her, my eyes widening in realization. Evangeline quickly looked away, aggressively fanning herself with her hand. Therefore, as the young lady of House Claudius, I am officially nullifying the temporary clause. From this moment on, you are my permanent, official friend. You are forbidden from ever leaving my side without my explicit permission. Do you understand? It was the most overbearing, incredibly bossy, and utterly adorable declaration of friendship I had ever heard in my entire life. A massive, unrestrained smile broke across my face. The sheer, overwhelming joy bubbling in my chest was impossible to hide. Without thinking about the hundreds of nobles watching, without caring about the strict rules of high society etiquette, I let go of the Duke's arm, stepped forward, and gently hugged the prickly, wonderful Villainess. Evangeline stiffened like a wooden board for a split second, absolutely paralyzed by the public display of affection. But then, very slowly, very hesitantly, her arms came up to awkwardly wrap around my shoulders. "I gladly accept the permanent contract, Evangeline," I whispered happily. Standing just a step away, Dietrich von Claudius watched the two of us. A soft, incredibly rare smile graced his lips, completely transforming his cold, terrifying face into something breathtakingly warm. The heroine's plot was in ruins. The ex-fiancé was a laughingstock, and I, Larret Ansi, had just secured the most powerful, unshakable alliance in the entire empire. For the first time since I realized I was trapped in this wretched novel, I looked forward to tomorrow.